Hey guys. Here is part 4 of What If Naruto Saved Haku. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 8: Snakes in the Grass. A mild gust of wind blew through the fence-enclosed street, sending Sakura's hair aflutter and nearly tearing the small, thin paper application from her hand. Abruptly, she considered letting it go. The wind quickly passed, but the impulse did not. The Chunin exam was dangerous. Sakura knew that much. People died during the course of the elaborate tests. It made some sense, given that the carrot dangling at the end was a promotion to Chunin. To Sakura, that carrot had never looked less appetizing. Becoming a Chunin meant a lot of things, and few of them seemed pleasant to Sakura. Was she prepared for the increased responsibility, the more rigorous demands that would be placed upon her? Was she skilled enough to take on C and B-ranked missions on a regular basis? Was she ready to have her hands stained red? No, Sakura thought, I'm not. There did not seem to be much of a point to her taking the exam. She didn't even want a promotion. That was assuming that she even got far enough to be considered, which was unlikely no matter how motivated she was. But if I don't take it, what would Sasuke-kun think? The answer came to her depressingly quickly. He would think that she was weak, which she was. Sakura had no illusions left about her own strength. Even so, she didn't want Sasuke to think of her like that. She didn't want him to. Sakura. Sakura started as her teacher's voice suddenly intruded upon her thoughts. Her head whipped to the right and she stared, wide-eyed, at Kakashi, who was crouching casually atop a nearby fence. He raised his hand casually in greeting. Yo! Kakashi-sensei. Sakura sighed with something approaching resignation as her heart rate calmed down. What do you want? She was in no mood for her teacher's teasing. He hopped down from the fence to stand in front of her. I wanted to talk about that. He nodded at the exam application still clutched in her right hand. Sakura's lips turned down. What about it? You don't have to take it, you know. What? The exam, he said seriously. If you don't think you're ready, if you don't want to take it, you don't have to. I know that. She forced herself to smile, to hide the uneasy feeling boiling within her. Had he seen right through her worries so easily? Is that all, sensei? I need to. Sasuke, Kakashi cut in, is not a good enough reason to aim for Chunin. Sakura's eyes widened and then narrowed as an instinctive spark of anger flared to life. Sensei, she growled tightly. Becoming a Chunin is serious. He continued, ignoring her angry reaction. Kakashi's single visible eye held her gaze, regarding her with unusual gravity. You'll have to risk your life for the chance to be promoted. If you do get promoted, you'll end up in a position where lives will depend on you. If you don't want to become a Chunin, if you don't want it for yourself, then don't take the exam. He turned and began to stroll away, his lecture apparently finished. And if I do? Sakura asked defiantly, her pride unable to let him walk away with the last word after being unilaterally lectured. Kakashi-sensei stopped and turned his head. You'll be killed. Sakura! She blinked. That catty tone. You know? Sure enough, when she looked up she was greeted by a pair of brilliant blue eyes. For the first time in a while, Sakura didn't feel a twinge of disgust at the sight of blue eyes or blonde hair. You know, Sakura murmured neutrally. It had been several months since she'd spoken with the other girl. The last time had been before they had left for the wave, and she was uncertain as to why Ino had actually sought her out. They had not parted on good terms after their last exchange of verbal barbs. Geez, her rival sniffed, imperiously placing her hands on her hips. I know you're slow, but that's no excuse to be that empty-headed. I've called your name 4 times, you know. Sakura couldn't muster the energy to respond to that the way it deserved. Kakashi-sensei's grim words still echoed in her ears. What do you want? She asked dully. Ino frowned at Sakura's uncharacteristic lack of spirit for an instant. The moment passed quickly, and a second later her condescending smirk was firmly fixed back in place. I'm looking for Sasuke-kun. She practically purred the boy's name. Sakura reflexively scowled. Why? Ino's smirk broadened at Sakura's irritated demand. No reason, she murmured, absently toying with the end of her long blonde ponytail. Sakura stared at Ino, nonplussed. I just thought I'd invite him out to a party. Ino elaborated after Sakura's silence had stretched too long for her comfort. A party? Sakura parroted flatly. Ino nodded cheerfully. One of my cousins is having her birthday party tonight. I thought that Sasuke-kun might like to come with me. Be around a real girl for a change. Her brief, disdainful glance at Sakura's chest underscored her meaning well enough. Fury threatened to take hold of Sakura. You don't have much there either, she thought spitefully. Sakura forced her anger down and stepped around Ino. I don't know where Sasuke-kun is, Sakura murmured quietly as she passed the other girl. Sorry, but you'll have to keep looking. She had barely gotten 5 steps away from Ino before her former friend's voice called out from behind her. Forehead girl! Sakura stopped, her fists convulsing. What? Ino folded her arms and looked to the side, intently studying a mannequin display on the side of the street. It starts at 7, she said nonchalantly. We're having it at my house. Sakura half-turned. Ino. Don't get me wrong. Ino smirked. I'm only inviting you so that you can see how well I can show Sasuke-kun a good time. She flourished her hair, turned, and began walking away from Sakura. Sakura stared incredulously at Ino's retreating back, an angry retort rising within her throat. She whirled around, turning her back on Ino, and began to stalk away. Moments later she leapt, taking to the rooftops to begin her search. Sakura moved determinedly, her earlier depression forgotten. We'll see about that. It didn't take her long to find Sasuke. That was the easy part. The hard part was yet to come. Sakura took a deep breath, fought down the butterflies going mad in her stomach, and leapt lightly down to street level to join her crush. Sasuke-kun! She called out, jogging to catch up to the boy. He ignored her presence, his pace unflagging as he continued to walk towards his destination. Sakura reached his side and slowed her pace to match his. Are you going home? She asked curiously, leaning slightly towards him, her hands clasped demurely behind her back. No. Oh? She murmured, deflating once she realized he had nothing more to say. Sakura quickly perked up again. Nah, Sasuke-kun, there's a party going on tonight, and I was wondering if you would go, with me. She trailed off, pink-faced, abruptly feeling too shy to continue. Sasuke stopped. Sakura came to a halt as well, turning to face him as she did so. She glanced at his bland expression uncertainly before putting on her cutest smile as she waited expectantly. For a long moment, Sasuke regarded her. She felt a flush creeping across her cheeks as she weathered his scrutiny. Before long, her smile began to falter. Finally, she could only stand and look back apprehensively. What is he thinking? Sakura wondered nervously. Why isn't he saying anything? Sakura. She nearly jumped. Yes. She squeaked embarrassingly. The Chunin exam starts tomorrow. Sakura blinked uncertainly. I know. Sasuke nodded slowly, as if coming to an inner conclusion. He walked forward, coming to stop once their shoulders were abreast. Sakura turned her head to glance at him, meeting his sideways glance tentatively. His dark eyes held hers and then flicked away dismissively. A real shinobi would not waste time on such frivolous pursuits. Sasuke once again walked away from Sakura, leaving her standing there, her numb gaze resting blankly on his retreating back. Light fled from the room gradually, its scope narrowing, the darkness deepening, as the door swung to a close. The door clicked shut, throwing the room entirely into shadow. Dim light filtered through the window, peeking around the edges of her curtains. Sakura slumped back slightly against her bedroom door. Her lower lip quivered. I won't. Sakura sniffled. Tears forged damp trails down her cheeks. She reached up, angrily wiping her eyes. I won't cry. Not again. Her bottom lip continued to quiver despite her determination. Her eyes watered, creating surreal shapes from the gloom. Sasuke-kun, Sakura whispered hoarsely, wrapping her arms around herself. It wasn't the first time Sasuke had rejected her. It wasn't even the most hurtful thing he had ever said to her. Yet, Sakura felt as if the ground she had been standing on had been glass all along, and Sasuke had shattered that glass. A real shinobi would not waste time on such frivolous pursuits. The look in his eyes had been dismissive. Sasuke-kun had judged her, and found her to be irrelevant. Unworthy. After all she had done to win his affection, his respect. Was that it? That was all her efforts amounted to. Sasuke had finally looked at her, and he felt nothing but contempt for what he had seen. Sakura fell, face first, on top of her bed and buried her face in her pillow. She whimpered quietly, her chest stuttering with sobs she couldn't stop. A shinobi must not show any emotion in any situation. A ninja must put the mission first and have a heart that does not allow tears. She was worthless. Sasuke had seen that. What hurt the most was that it was true. Sakura couldn't help but acknowledge it. All of her training, all of the things Team 7 had accomplished, and she still couldn't even master her own emotions. She still couldn't stop the sobs that racked her, couldn't quiet the jagged pain Sasuke's words had caused in her chest. She knew that she wasn't a very good shinobi. The wave mission had disabused her of any notion she might have had about it. But Sasuke had all but said that she wasn't a real shinobi at all. Half of her childhood had been given to the academy. She had trained and studied, especially studied, more than most of the other girls in her class. She had earnestly listened to her teachers and absorbed the lessons they had to offer. Sasuke had been her guiding motivation for nearly half of the years she had spent learning to become a ninja. Sakura was smart, she knew that, and was proud of that fact. But she wouldn't have spent nearly as much time studying if she hadn't been driven to impress her crush. Maybe she would still be friends with Ino. Instead, she had become a genin. Instead, she had quivered under the smothering weight of Zabuza's killing intent and wept helplessly over Sasuke's still, cold form. Instead, she had trained with Naruto, laughed with him, helped him, and watched him wash the blood off of his hands after murdering an unconscious boy. Instead, Sasuke had disregarded all of her efforts, all of the trials she had gone through, and told her that she was not a shinobi. It was all for nothing? It was such a strange, alien thought that Sakura couldn't help but giggle. She hiccuped, but continued to giggle into her pillow. If her tears continued to flow, if her sobs increased in intensity, if there was an edge of hysteria to her giggles, there was no one around to comment. Crimson and orange dimly painted the ground as the slowly sinking sun set the horizon ablaze. The trees in Training Ground 3 cast long shadows eastward over the brook that cut the clearing in half. The dry summer air cooled as the sun sank lethargically into the ground. Naruto shivered slightly, not altogether pleased by the dropping temperatures. The day had been unusually hot, and he had been all too glad to shuck off his jacket and shirt and dive into the stream to cool, that is, to train. Haku had joined him there soon after, and her subtle disapproval at his slacking had quickly motivated him to begin training in earnest despite the energy-sapping heat. Of course, that had led to a spar with Haku. Predictably, he had lost, again, much to his mounting frustration. She'd left an hour ago. Haku had been so apologetic for accepting a double shift without asking him that he'd ended up stammering nervous reassurances and completely forgot to mention the Chunin exam until after she had left. Chunin exam, Chunin exam. Naruto thought gleefully. The exams were less than a day away, and Naruto could hardly sit still. He had no idea what the exams entailed. But Kakashi-sensei had said that if he completed the whole thing, he would have a shot at being promoted. That thought alone was enough to fire Naruto's imagination and set his heart racing with anticipation. But once the sun had begun to set, the water had begun to grow cold. Naruto had quickly gotten out and begun to slowly move through the few kata that he had learned from Haku, but he had soon become aware of his damp skin and soggy pants as increasingly cold air passed over him. Then goosebumps had broken out along Naruto's arms and his jaw had started quivering, which had forced him to clench his teeth together to keep them from chattering. After a while, he could no longer maintain the slow, controlled pace he had been running through the kata with. Naruto abandoned his solo practice and formed a seal. Several Kage Bunshin appeared, and Naruto launched himself at his clones without delay. Within minutes, Naruto was sweating, his heart pumping furiously, as he battled with himself. Eventually, as his clones dwindled to merely a handful in number, Naruto called a halt to his impromptu melee. Sparring with himself with no holds barred was good training, but it also tended to bring out his bad habits. Instinctively reacting with his old techniques, rather than applying the training he had gone through in the Susutsuken was frustrating, especially when his head knew better. Naruto still hadn't practiced enough to reach the point where he could instinctively react using any of the Susutsuken's basic techniques, and his body still remembered the old way better than the new one. It had only been a month, less than a month, really, since he had started, but the way Haku could still slide through his defenses like they weren't even there was frustrating. During those times, Naruto felt like he hadn't improved at all. He was starting to get the hang of certain things though. Occasionally, he would see a clone's punch heading his way and try to react to it in two distinctly different ways at once. It was incredibly dangerous, since it put him off balance, confused him, and left him momentarily defenseless, but it also meant that he was starting to become accustomed to the basics of the Susutsuken. Once he realized that, Naruto's determination to train had redoubled. After weeks of what seemed like no progress, he finally had some indication that he was in fact learning. He just had to work out the kinks and practice until the basics he had learned were as firmly stamped into his muscles as they were in his brain. Naruto ordered his clones to line up. "Punch me," he said, gesturing to the first one in line. "Slowly," Naruto added after the Kage Bunshin started grinning. As the shadow clone slowly sent his fist towards Naruto's face, Naruto carefully stepped aside to move in at an angle while guiding and catching the clone's fist with his own hands as he worked through one of the few basic defensive moves Haku had taught him. The key, according to Haku, wasn't fast or ferocious training, despite those qualities being the style's strength. Practice slowly, Naruto-sama, she had advised. Focus on proper form, on doing things correctly. Speed will come later. He had reluctantly accepted the wisdom in her advice. Naruto had no desire to learn a new taijutsu style only for it to end up as shaky as his first. What he had done before hadn't worked, that much was clear to Naruto. He would go slow and practice carefully and with patience, despite how impatient he often felt with practicing slowly. That way he would be able to build a solid foundation for his close combat skills instead of a base of quicksand, at least he hoped so. For nearly a half an hour, Naruto slowly worked through several basic strikes and counters with his clones, doing his best to perform every technique correctly. The Kage Bunshin were helpful for that as well, since they could see any flaws in his execution better than he could and had no problems criticizing him about them. Naruto sometimes thought that he didn't like himself very much. "You're doing that wrong," a voice pointed out cheerfully. Naruto's slow, exaggerated attack against one of his clones dissolved into a stumble. He whirled around, trying to find the source of the unfamiliar voice. "Who?" His eyes found a tall man leaning against a tree less than 5 meters away. "Hello?" The big man waved, smiling cheerfully at Naruto. "I'm Takai Kuda. It's nice to meet you." The Mist-nin, Naruto recalled. He hesitated, remembering all of the things he had heard and experienced about shinobi from Kirigakure. Still, the man seemed friendly enough. "I'm Uzumaki Naruto," the Jonin from Kirigakure interrupted, still smiling. Suspicion flooded through Naruto. "You know my name?" Kuda nodded enthusiastically. "I heard all about you in the Wave Country. You're quite a famous person there." Glee clubbed suspicion over the head and buried its body. "Famous?" Naruto echoed eagerly, his eyes wide. "Oh yes," the tall Mist-nin agreed. "I don't think there's a person in the country of Wave that hasn't heard your name. They even named that massive bridge after you." Naruto sighed, feeling something akin to bliss settling over his mind. Famous.it was a heady thought. "What's it called?" he asked, nearly breathless with anticipation. "The Great Naruto Bridge!" Kuda exclaimed dramatically. The Great Naruto Bridge. Naruto considered the name methodically, as if savoring its flavor. It was delicious. He grinned goofily at nothing in particular. Kuda's smile broadened, and the two of them stood grinning at each other for several moments. Abruptly, Naruto frowned. "What do you mean you're doing that wrong?" Naruto demanded. That?" Kuda adopted a serious expression as he walked closer to Naruto. "Show me your arm." He gestured. Naruto stared at him for a moment. "Why?" "So I can show you how to do that move properly." Naruto guardedly offered his arm. Kuda promptly rapped his knuckles sharply against the side of Naruto's upper right arm. "Hey!" Naruto protested. "Did it hurt?" Kuda asked, silencing Naruto. "Not really," Naruto answered cautiously. It had hurt a bit, and would have hurt a lot more had there been more power behind the blow, but it hadn't produced the instant, piercing pain that some of Haku's demonstrations did. "It didn't hurt because I didn't hit you in the right place. Close, but not quite. But close isn't good enough for some spots. You have to hit the nerves dead on or else your enemy can just shrug it off." "I know that," Naruto muttered. Kuda drawled skeptically. "It didn't look like it." "I do know," Naruto insisted. "I just haven't practiced enough to get it down yet." Kuda nodded, smiling. "Then I'll help you practice." "Really?" Naruto asked eagerly. "Sure. Then let's get started." "All right." Kuda's expression became serious. "Punch me." Naruto didn't hesitate. He had learned, the hard way, not to underestimate his teachers, especially those of the Jonin variety. His fist was intercepted with a deceptively lazy movement on Kuda's part, and Naruto's right arm was pushed across to the left of his body. Naruto watched as Kuda's other hand came up from beneath his left arm. Abruptly, the arm blurred and Naruto gritted his teeth as pain lit the nerves of his upper arm on fire. "See?" Kuda asked, releasing Naruto, who immediately began rubbing his tender right arm soothingly. "I could hurt you even if I miss, with enough power. I might even be able to break the bone. But it requires a lot less effort and power on my part to hit the right spot, the vulnerable spot, and it has a much greater effect for the amount of power I put into it." "I get it," Naruto groused. Kuda nodded agreeably, perhaps picking up on Naruto's exasperation. Now try it on me, okay? Naruto grunted in surprise, his hands only just getting up in time to turn aside his impromptu teacher's punch. Good reflexes, Kuda complimented. Now the next part. Naruto moved, doing his best to mimic the deceptive smoothness of Kuda's earlier demonstration. He struck and looked up at the Miss Nin hopefully, but Kuda's face showed no reaction. How was that? Naruto asked eagerly. He was sure he had gotten it right. Not quite right. Let's try again. They settled into a slow, studied rhythm of attack and counterattack as Naruto attempted to perform the technique properly and Kuda, in turn, demonstrated it on him with painful precision. So, are you going to be in the Chunin exam? Kuda asked conversationally as his knuckles jarringly rapped Naruto's upper arm. Yeah. Naruto grinned brightly, mentions of the exam driving away thoughts of his aching arms. I'm going to kick ass. No doubt. Kuda grinned in return before shaking his head as Naruto's strike connected sloppily. Go easy on my students, will you? You have students? Naruto asked, grunting as Kuda's counterattack seemed to bite into bone. For a year and a half now, the Miss Jonin replied. This is their second time taking the exam. A year and a half and it's only their second time? Naruto echoed somewhat incredulously. I've only been a genin for about 6 months and I'm taking the exam. Your sensei must have a lot of faith in you, Kuda replied, his smile unwavering even as Naruto's fist connected with his target for the first time. Naruto's chest puffed up proudly in response to the compliment. That must be why he's teaching you the Susutsuken, right? Naruto blinked. Huh! The copy ninja's reputation is well earned. Still, I was surprised to see someone from Konoha practicing the Susutsuken. There's hardly anyone in Kiri that practices it anymore, so seeing it in Konoha startled me. But he's not. Naruto trailed off. He's not what? Kuda asked curiously. The silence stretched, broken intermittently by Naruto's grunts of pain and the other sounds of their practice. Naruto kept his lips sealed. He didn't want to bring Haku into the conversation, not with a Miss Nin. Your sensei isn't the one teaching you the Susutsuken? The question, who is? Hung unsaid in the air between them despite Kuda's innocuous tone. Naruto's lips tightened as he contemplated the corner he had backed himself into. It's already that time? Kuda exclaimed, abruptly disengaging. What? I've got to go. Kuda explained apologetically. I have to meet my team to go over some things before the exam starts tomorrow. Kuda began walking away at a brisk pace. Naruto stared at the foreign Jonin's retreating back, bemused. Hey! Kuda waved without looking back. It was fun talking with you. See you later. Naruto continued to stare, nonplussed. Moments later, it occurred to him that he had sidestepped the trap his own words had set for him, and he sighed slightly in relief. Naruto-sama? It took all he had to restrain himself from starting as Haku's voice sounded from behind him. Naruto turned to see Haku standing only a few feet away, still dressed in her white work clothes, her head tilted slightly in curiosity. Haku! Naruto offered a smile in greeting. You're done with work for today? She nodded, her brown eyes moving from the now empty path to Naruto's face. Who was that? Naruto hesitated. He wasn't sure if telling her that he had been speaking with a ninja from Kirigakure was a good idea. Some foreign ninja looking for a spot to train. Naruto shrugged. A foreign ninja? She asked, concerned. Why is a foreign shinobi even in Konoha? He said he was here for the Chunin exam. She blinked and nodded. I heard it's starting tomorrow. Everyone seems to be talking about it. Really? And we just heard about it today. Naruto wondered. His eyes narrowed. Stupid Kakashi-sensei. Naruto-sama? Haku murmured questioningly, breaking him out of his angry contemplations. He couldn't stay mad for long anyway, not today. The Chunin exam starts tomorrow. Guess what? Naruto blurted excitedly. What is it? Her head tilted again. Kakashi-sensei nominated us to take the Chunin exam. Haku became still. Will you take them? He looked at her incredulously. Of course. Haku bit her lower lip anxiously. I see, she murmured, looking down. As the silence stretched, Naruto began to frown. While he hadn't been expecting her to jump up and cheer at the news, he had hoped for a more enthusiastic response. It's like I just kicked her puppy or something, Naruto thought unhappily, folding his arms. What's wrong? He finally demanded. The exams are dangerous, Haku said quietly. Her eyes held his earnestly, as if she were trying to convey a hidden message. Don't worry about that. Naruto grinned confidently. I'll beat up anyone that comes after me. Haku was silent in response to his bold claim, her eyes never leaving his. Haku? She mustered a faint smile. Don't lose. Haku looked away, suddenly more interested in the nearby trees than him. There was an undercurrent of emotion in her voice that he couldn't name. Whatever it was, it stole his grin from his lips. Naruto nodded. I won't, he promised solemnly. I won't let you down. How could he do otherwise? More than his promotion was on the line. Haku had spent so much time and effort in training him. He could not allow himself to fail and render her teachings meaningless. No one had ever invested so much in training him before, and he had to respond to that effort in the only way that meant anything. I'll make you proud. Are you hungry, Naruto-sama? Yeah. He folded his arms behind his head, grinning again. What's for dinner? Naruto asked eagerly as they began the long walk home. Stew. What? Again? He whined. Yes. She sighed. Again. Making stew was cheap, as long as she didn't spring for beef and was careful about proportions. A pot of stew could be stretched for several meals, which made it even more economical and easy on their strained budget. There were many perfectly logical reasons for cooking stew instead of going out to eat, or even cooking a more traditional dinner, that didn't prevent her from being just as sick of eating it as Naruto was. Naruto fell silent. He knew the reasons why they had been eating stews so often just as well as Haku did. It's my fault. If he hadn't sent the rest of the bonus pay away, he couldn't allow himself to regret that. It was yet another reason he couldn't afford to fail the exams. As he was now, he couldn't even support himself reliably, much less Haku. But with a Chunin's pay grade he would have no problems. Becoming a Chunin was no longer just for his own sake, even though his own dreams demanded it. I'll definitely win. Sakura woke to the quiet, steady sound of a clock ticking away the seconds. The sun had set, and the faint hint of sunlight from outside had dimmed to the artificial glow of street lamps. Slowly, Sakura sat up, feeling strangely exhausted. She put a hand to her forehead. Why am I? Sasuke's words rang through her head once again. Sakura's hand dropped over her face for a moment, and she forced herself to take several deep breaths. I can't do this anymore, she sighed. How many times had her feelings been disregarded? Too many, Sakura thought bitterly. How much pain did she have to go through because of Sasuke, because of being a shinobi of Konoha? Too much. It was too much. She couldn't take it anymore. Her shoulders weren't wide enough to bear the burden. She wasn't strong enough to endure it all and keep stepping forward. It just wasn't worth it anymore. The realization hurt, threatened to drown her with its implications, but Sakura felt strangely lighter, as if a yoke had been slipped from her neck. Sasuke, Naruto, her own doubts about her profession, none of it mattered anymore. She was done with it all. She smiled at that thought even though her eyes were watering, threatening to overflow once more. Tomorrow, Sakura murmured softly. Tomorrow, I'll go and see the Hokage, and then, I won't have to worry about any of it ever again. She looked at her clock. It was nearly 6. Sakura stood abruptly, her decision solidifying in her mind. A few quick steps took her to her closet. The lights flickered on, and Sakura carefully, almost reverently, removed her new dress from the rack. It took her 40 minutes to get ready, and that was rushing things. Sakura sped back into her room, her hair still slightly damp, looking frantically for a pair of shoes that would match her dress. When she finally found a pair she was satisfied with, another 5 minutes had passed. I'm going to be late, she thought unhappily, grabbing her kunai holster and equipment pouch. Sakura froze, looking down at the objects she had instinctively picked up. A whirlwind of feelings and memories threatened to surge over the barriers she had firmly fixed in place. The moment passed, and Sakura slowly set her equipment back down. I won't need these anymore, she whispered. She turned to find Team 7 staring at her accusingly. Sakura padded over to her desk and lightly traced a finger over the top of the picture frame. Her teeth worried at her bottom lip for a moment before her eyes tightened and her mouth firmed into a determined line. Goodbye. She told the picture, told the last half of her life. Sakura turned the picture over, laying it face down on her desk. Moments later, the lights in the room went dark and the door shut with a quiet click. It was a sign from heaven. Sakura hadn't thought that she would get the opportunity to wear her new dress anytime soon, but she had been proven wrong. Whether that was a good thing or not, well, only time would tell. But she had needed something to do, someone to talk to, or she would have gone crazy in her room, with nothing but her thoughts to keep her company. Ino's surprising invitation had hung in the back of her head, and Sakura had eventually swallowed her pride, what little she had left, and decided to go. She almost hadn't gone, it was Ino, after all. Weren't they great rivals for Sasuke-kun's heart? But no, that wasn't right. Not anymore. Hadn't they been rivals for Sasuke-kun's heart? One look at the shimmering silk of her new dress, hanging temptingly on a hanger in her closet, had convinced her, or so Sakura reasoned to herself. She couldn't admit that she was merely running from the silence of being alone, from the inevitable inward bent her thoughts would take without anyone or anything distracting her. To her surprise, she had actually had fun. Sure, Ino Pig had been as annoying and snippy as always, and she barely knew any of Ino's cousins, much less their gaggle of friends, but even so. Sakura smiled wistfully as nostalgia stretched light, gentle fingers through her mind. Once upon a time, she had spent nearly every day with Ino. Even in the heat of their rivalry, she had interacted with the girl often. That era had ended the day Team 7 had been formed, and since then Sakura had hardly seen her blonde rival at all. A part of her, a tiny, tiny part of her, had missed Ino. Ino was the closest thing to a female friend that Sakura had left since she had graduated and passed the real Jonin exam, even though they weren't really friends anymore. She felt just a bit lonely without Ino around to bicker and compete with. Sakura sighed, abruptly feeling utterly depressed. That's kind of pathetic, isn't it? Her subconscious was apparently in complete agreement with her conscious mind, since Sakura only felt more depressed after the thought crossed her mind. Sakura's shoulders drooped as she continued to trudge home. Cool mist brushed across her face, and the street lights cast eerie shadows as Sakura moved through the nearly abandoned side streets that led to a shortcut to her home. Sakura's eyes studied the dusty street dully, and her thoughts were focused inwards, which was perhaps the reason why she walked right into someone. She blinked, startled as the person she had bumped into grunted, and stepped back quickly after recovering her bearings. "I'm sorry," she apologized softly before stepping around the boy she had bumped into. A strong hand clamped on her shoulder. "Oh," a male voice drawled. "That's it? You're sorry? That hurt, you know." Sakura tensed, alarm and a surge of adrenaline blasting away her gloomy contemplations. Instinctively, her right hand reached for a kunai. She felt a moment of confusion and panic when her hand only met silk. "I didn't bring any equipment," Sakura remembered. Earlier in the night, she had felt strangely free without the weight of a kunai holster on her thigh or an equipment pouch on her hip. Now, though, Sakura grimaced. "I apologize," Sakura said levelly as she turned to face the potential threat, struggling to keep her voice diplomatic. "Who is this asshole?" Purple paint formed odd patterns on his face, and his eyes were narrow slits that reminded her vaguely of Naruto's own occasionally squinty expressions. The baggy black bodysuit he wore covered him from head to toe, and the hood he wore seemed to have odd triangular points on each side of his head. Sakura's eyes were drawn to the older boy's forehead protector. Suna, she recognized the symbol stamped into the steel plate. "Little girls should pay attention to where they're going." The foreign nin sneered and shoved her away. Sakura stumbled back. "Kankuru, cut it out!" A blonde girl that Sakura hadn't noticed before hissed. "Just because Gaara—" "Shut up, Temari!" The boy, Kankuru, snapped heatedly. For an instant, he seemed to glance around nervously, as if waiting for something terrible to happen. When it didn't, the black-clothed Sunanin turned his attention back to Sakura. She shivered despite herself at the sight of his cruel smirk. "What?" she asked defensively. "You bumped into me." "I said I was sorry," Sakura retorted uneasily, not liking the dark look in his eyes. What was the big deal? She had unintentionally bumped into him and apologized for it. Why was the foreigner intent on escalating the matter? "And I said it hurt, you stupid little bitch!" Kankuru snarled, stepping forward aggressively. Sakura forced herself to hold her ground. "How are you going to make up for that, huh?" She recoiled as his hot, foul breath brushed across her face. "Huh?" Kankuru demanded. "Kankuru!" Temari barked. "I said I was sorry," Sakura repeated, moving hurriedly to step around him. It took all her willpower to keep her voice from trembling. She was in the dark, alone and without her weapons. Her dress was not only delicate and expensive, it was also restrictive, and it would interfere with her range of motion. The shoes on her feet weren't any better. If it came to a fight, she would be at a severe disadvantage. And aside from all of that, the feeling that she had been repressing welled up within her chest. Sasuke's words echoed in her ears once more. She wasn't a kunoichi, not anymore. Maybe she never had been. Even if she tried to fight, what was the use? Had she ever fought and won when it truly mattered? Suddenly, the Suna boy seemed far more intimidating than she had thought. Kankuru moved to block her. Who would be satisfied by such a half-assed sorry? His eyelids relaxed from their squint for the first time during their encounter. He glanced down, scrutinizing her dress, and his smirk broadened. Get down on your knees and apologize, and then I might accept it. A nest of sleeping birds took flight, startled by the sharp report of her open-handed slap. Kankura reeled, barely able to keep his balance as he stumbled away from Sakura. He wiped away the thin trail of blood dripping from his nose and looked at his hand. When he looked up again, Sakura took an unconscious step back at the malevolent fury in his eyes. Sakura stared at her hand. Why did I do that? It had been like an instinctive reaction. She had lashed out before her brain could even finish processing his words. Fear surged within her as she contemplated the raw anger on Kankura's face. I have to get away, Sakura thought frantically. She turned quickly to flee. If he caught her, it was over. There was no way she could win. He was a shinobi, and she was a... You bitch! He hissed. His fingers jerked, and Sakura's world became a blur as her feet were swept out from under her. The impact forcefully expelled the air from her lungs, and for an instant she stared up at the dark sky, stunned and uncomprehending. Then a dark shape loomed above her. A foot came down, driving into her stomach. Air left Sakura in an explosive rush. She coughed and spluttered while rushing into her mouth as she frantically tried to take in air and feed her empty lungs. Kankura ground his foot against her, sending agonizing waves of pain through her. More of her dinner welled up in her throat. He lifted his foot. Sakura turned on her side, still gasping for air like a fish on land, and vomited. Black spots danced in front of her eyes. Her arms were trembling, strangely weak as she tried to push herself up off of the ground. A lazy kick to her ribs sent her sprawling again. Get up, Kankura ordered. Her breath was coming in quick, wheezing gasps, and her limbs quivered of their own volition as Sakura struggled to comply. Blood tasted heavy on her tongue. Eventually, she was able to push herself up to her knees. Are you sorry yet? Yes, Sakura whimpered. She was completely beaten. It was an obvious outcome, though. Kankura was a genuine shinobi, while she was just a worthless pretender. Bow, and say I'm very sorry, Kankura-sama. Kankuru, the Suna kunoichi said tersely. Don't go too far. We still have business, remember? Yeah. He waved her away, his eyes never leaving Sakura's shaking form. Well? He asked expectantly. Sakura placed her hands in front of her and slowly, painfully, began to bow to him. What am I doing? She didn't know what she was doing. Why am I bowing to this guy? She didn't know why, except that she was weak and he was strong. He was a shinobi and she was nothing. What else could she do? Her hair began to pool in the dirt. Moments later, Sakura's forehead touched the cold, hard ground. I'm very sorry, Sakura whispered. She swallowed. Kankura-sama. A few moments passed, punctuated only by the loud thumping of her heart in her chest. Sakura risked a look up. Her eyes met Kankura's for a moment before flinching away at the utter contempt in his eyes. Unwittingly, she caught Temari's gaze. The older girl was looking at her with revulsion in her eyes. After a second, the blonde Sunanine's eyes flicked away dismissively and her expression smoothed. Sakura's breath caught. Temari turned away. Let's go, Kankura. He grunted and turned to follow his sister. What? Had she been judged again? Had she been found wanting, again? Her eyes stung with tears, not of pain but of frustration and humiliation. Why am I so pathetic? It didn't make any sense. How could she be so weak, so useless, so helpless, time and time again? She had spent years in the academy along with all of her peers. How had she fallen so far behind? Had she wasted all of those years? Why was she so worthless? Why was her forehead pressed to the ground? Her hands tightened, her nails digging furrows into the packed dirt. Why was she watching someone else's back again? Because I'm weak. She had been bullied again. The realization left a sour taste in her mouth. It had been years since she had been cowed by bullies. Sakura was no longer that girl. So why didn't I fight back? Terror had blanked her mind of everything except the desire to flee, to do whatever it took to survive, to stop the pain. Thoughts of fighting back had fled before things had become violent. Her own doubts had crippled her. She was weak. It wasn't just weakness of the body. She could acknowledge that now. Her mind was weak. Her spirit was weak. She wasn't capable of standing and enduring like NAR, like her teammates. She couldn't control her own mind and reign in her fear. It didn't matter how skilled she was or wasn't, without the ability to overcome her fear, without the resolve to fight, there was no way she could win anything. I don't like this. Sakura began to push herself off of the ground. She spat the dirt and blood out of her mouth, but the gritty taste remained. I don't like being weak. There was no happiness to be found in kowtowing. There was no satisfaction in being at the mercy of whims of those stronger than her. I don't want to cry anymore. Tears of humiliation, tears of frustration, tears of sadness and anguish and pain. She was tired of crying. She was tired of being helpless and weak, of being incapable of anything but weeping in the face of danger. I don't like myself. She wasn't a good person. She wasn't even a strong one. Her forehead was too big, her hair too strange, her chest and hips too flat, her hands were too weak, her legs were too slow, her brain too dull. Sakura felt pathetic. Trembling legs pushed her unsteadily upright again. Sakura began to brush the dirt off of her dress, but only succeeded in smearing it further. She stared down at herself. The deep green silk that she had fallen in love with was marred by dirt and small splotches of blood and vomit. It was torn in several places and badly scuffed in others. Her dress had been ruined. Sakura closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She bit down, harshly halting the quivering of her bottom lip. Her hands reached down, and she bent slightly, gathering the hem of her dress in her hands. For several seconds she stood still, running tender fingers over the silk. I want to change. A moment later, a tearing sound rent the air. Roughly, Sakura tore the bottom of her dress, freeing her legs. She took the ragged strip of silk and turned it around, using the clean side to wipe the dirt and filth off of her face. When she was done, she reached up and wound the dirty piece of her dress and wound it through her hair in an impromptu headband, tying her soiled hair back away from her face. It fits, she nodded to herself. Sakura looked down the road into the gloom in the direction the Suna Jonin had disappeared in. Finally, she turned around and once again began making her way home. Her footsteps quickened. She had to hurry home. There were a lot of things to be done before the exam started. Day had dawned in a gentle wave of pink and orange. All too soon, dawn's gentle colors yielded to blue and white as the sun climbed higher into the sky. The birdsong from the nearby trees began to pick up in both intensity and quantity. Foliage whispered as the chill morning air passed through the open window, raising goosebumps along Haku's arms. She hardly noticed. All her attention was focused on Naruto, who stood still in front of the kitchen table, an expression of deep thought on his face as he contemplated whether he should cram an extra shuriken or explosive seals in his equipment pouch. A lead ball had settled in Haku's stomach. She desperately wanted to say something, do something that would make him stay. But whenever she opened her mouth, words fled from her mind. What could she say to convince him? Naruto snapped his fingers, his eyes shining with revelation. I must have them both, he muttered to himself. Seconds later, he began his struggle to jam more ninja tools into his already overstuffed pouch. How could she say anything? He had hardly slept all night due to his excitement over the upcoming exam. His dream was to become Hokage, and to do so he would need to be promoted. How could she try to keep him from that? Haku bit her lower lip softly, her eyes lowering to study the floor. She couldn't. I must be strong. Her eyes went up again to rest on Naruto's back. I must support him, no matter what. She had made a promise to him, and to herself as well. She would be his strength, his pillar, and his sword. She would see his dreams fulfilled. There could be no room in her heart for her own weak, selfish desires. The sound of the refrigerator opening brought Haku's awareness back to Naruto. Naruto, finished dealing with his equipment, had moved on to the next and most important item on his agenda, breakfast. Naruto-sama, Haku called, quickly standing and moving into the small kitchen. I will make your breakfast. The answering look he gave her was half relived, half put out. No doubt he had been hoping sneak in a meal of cup ramen for breakfast under her nose. Breakfast came and went faster than Haku would have liked, and it seemed like before she knew it they were both out the door and on their way to their training ground. Damp, chill morning fog sat heavily over Konoha. Beads of moisture dripped from the leaves of trees, and the grass beneath their feet was slick and crisp. The sun, obscured by trees and the heavy shroud of fog, touched only lightly upon the small, out-of-the-way glade where they finally stopped. They began as they usually did, stretching and warming up their muscles. Haku desperately sought for advice she could give Naruto about the Chunin exam, but her mind drew nothing but blanks. She knew little enough about the exams taking place, nor had she ever taken one herself. What could she tell him that would help? Her mind was still blank by the time they finished their warm-ups. She could offer no advice about the exams, but she could still help him. Naruto-sama, today. She hesitated. Her eyes closed as she crushed the selfish words that leapt to the forefront of her mind. Today, she continued steadily. Would you mind if we did something a little different? Naruto stopped bouncing on the balls of his feet, though he still fairly vibrated with nervous energy, and looked at her quizzically. Like what? A new training exercise. Nothing more needed to be said for Naruto. He nodded eagerly. Okay. It is a simple exercise, she explained. I will attack you. You will defend yourself. Naruto nodded some more. When it became apparent that she wasn't about to say anything else, he blinked. And? That is all, Naruto-sama. How is that different from any other time? He protested. I will attack you, she repeated. And you will defend yourself. That is all there is to it. You will try to defend yourself, and I will break your defenses. But this is not a spar. We will not use ninjutsu. You will not counterattack. You will defend, I will attack, and that is all we will do. He scratched his head. So, we're honing my defenses? Not quite, she answered tersely before lunging forward. Naruto frantically crossed his arms in front of him, blocking her punch, which sent him sliding backwards. Hey! He yelled. What are you doing? We have begun, she replied flatly. Defend yourself! Haku launched herself at him, her body coiling to strike once more. It was as she had said. She attacked him, and he defended himself. Haku didn't follow through once she had broken through his guard, and every one of her strikes past that landed as a light tap, or it didn't land at all. In the best of times she abhorred causing him pain, even though she did it with the best intentions. But today was the day he faced a dangerous trial. She would not risk injuring him. In any case, landing her hits was beside the point. The point was to break through, and for the 2 hours available to her that was what she did. Naruto tried to defend himself, while she crushed, broke, overwhelmed, or outright bypassed his defenses. Every light tap, every time her fist stopped short of his nose, every time he found himself frozen with Haku well within his guard and poised to kill was a lesson in the fundamental nature of the Susutsuken. The essence of the water-cutting fist was buried in its name. The Susutsuken was the fist that cut that which could not be cut. It was a fist that was designed to cut at the enemy's mind, to cut away their will to fight, to slash the enemy's defenses to ribbons, shred their body's ability to fight, and cut their life away. It cut the enemy, and every technique was developed around that core principle. Naruto knew it in his mind. She had gone over it enough to ensure that, at least. He was even starting to learn it with his muscles. But she wanted him to feel the Susutsuken's undiluted essence, to know it until the knowledge was stamped into his bones. 2 hours was not enough time, but it was all she had. It was all she had, and in the blink of an eye it had slipped through her fingers like sand. He was gone. The morning dew had mostly evaporated by the time Naruto had abruptly declared their training to be at an end. Unbalanced, all Haku had been able to do was nod as he grinned at her and said his goodbyes. He was gone in the blink of an eye, off to face the Chunin exam. She had been left behind again. It had not been very hard for her to discover that it would be at least 5 days before she saw him again, unless something went wrong. Konoha was not very secretive about the length of the exams, only the tests themselves were considered to be something of a secret. It would be 5 long, miserable days. Worse was that he was so close. If she wanted to, she could go and watch over him, be by his side. No, she thought firmly. If she was discovered with him during the exams, he would probably be disqualified. She could not allow herself to ruin his chances for promotion just because of her own weak, selfish whims. All she could do was have faith in Naruto and wait, no matter how hard that was. Besides, she had things she had to do as well. Haku focused her chakra, flipping through a short series of seals, and watched intently as water flowed skyward from the stream that cut through her now de facto training ground. Once free from the flowing water beneath it, the writhing glob of water morphed, taking on a human shape. A crackling noise echoed throughout the clearing as the humanoid mass of water abruptly froze over. Her brow furrowed slightly, the only outward sign of her intense concentration. Only a few moments passed before she was staring at herself. Haku inspected her clone critically, noting the slight flaws that still had to be ironed out. The appearance of her ice clones, if she could truly call them that yet, were slowly starting to reach the acceptable range. In other areas, however, she focused again. There was a loud creaking, grinding noise as the clone began to move, causing Haku to wince. It was a struggle to get the clone to move much, and even when it moved she still could not figure out how to get it to move without making so much noise. A frustrated sigh burst free. She had started working on creating a workable ice clone not long before Zabuza had first met the slimy slug named Gatu, but her progress had been, and still was, slow. Haku had not had any problems learning Bunshin or Mizu Bunshin. She didn't understand why she was having so much trouble creating her own unique variation of those techniques. It took her too long to form them even after months of practice. When they were formed, she had to struggle and concentrate to get them to move properly. Then there was the horrible noise they made when they did move, as if a block of ice had just been dumped into boiling water. Sometimes she just wanted to pull her hair out in frustration. But she couldn't give up. Naruto-sama wouldn't give up, nor would her own pride allow her to back down from the challenge. Zabuza-san had called her a genius and Naruto-sama needed her to be strong. She would master the technique she had set out to create. She would become stronger. Naruto-sama would be gone for at least 5 days, and by the time he returned she would be able to show him her new technique. Haku took a deep breath as her hands wove together to form seals. A watery form rose from the stream. It was joined by another, and then another. Water hissed and cracked in protest as it swiftly froze over. Soon, Haku stood alone amidst a forest of figures clothed in ice. Ice crackled as her sculptures stirred to life. Haku's eyes narrowed in determination. 5 days. Good morning! Naruto greeted, sounding as cheerful as the birds chirping in the trees that dotted the academy's grounds. Sasuke grunted in return while Sakura ignored him, as usual. Naruto's bright grin didn't even twitch at the less than warm reception. Not today. Let's go! He exclaimed eagerly, walking quickly towards the academy's front doors. He reached them quickly, only to find himself alone. Naruto frowned and looked back to see his teammates walking towards him with an entirely too casual pace. His foot tapped the ground rapidly as he waited impatiently for Sakura and Sasuke to catch up. Naruto's frown deepened as he looked closer at Sakura's appearance. The traditional dark blue cloth that served as the mount for her hitate had been replaced by a dark green fabric. He opened his mouth as she drew closer, curiosity urging him to willingly broach the mutual silence that had developed between them. The dark look in her eyes and the grim set of her mouth convinced him otherwise. His teeth clicked as he quickly shut his mouth, the urge to speak to Sakura diminishing. Whatever had caused the dark circles beneath her eyes or the fury lurking within her green gaze, he wanted no part of it. Sakura passed by without a second glance, leaving Naruto behind to sigh in relief. At least she's not angry with me, he thought ruefully. She was, he knew, but at least he wasn't the immediate target of her rage. That was better than the alternative. Naruto fell into step with Sasuke. Sasuke, he whispered. What? What's with that ribbon? As she had passed, he had been close enough to identify it as silk, which meant it had to be a ribbon or something like it. No one used silk just to mount a hitate. It was too valuable to waste on something that would be stained and torn on a frequent basis, at least to anyone with a measure of common sense and a solid ceiling to their bank account. Sasuke didn't need to ask what he was talking about. No doubt he had wondered the same thing. He shrugged. She said it was a reminder. Naruto's face scrunched. A reminder? He asked. Of what? Sasuke shrugged again, saying nothing. Naruto sighed, letting the matter drop. It was clear that Sasuke didn't know any more than that. The crowd began to thicken as they passed through the academy's hallways on their way to the main stairwell. By the time they had reached the stairwell, they were surrounded by other Chunin hopefuls. They spent several minutes shuffling forward towards the stairs before Sakura impatiently pushed her way through to the other side of the mass of genin and headed down the hallway. Naruto and Sasuke followed quickly. None of them had the patience to wait for the crowd to clear, and the other stairwells were clogged as well. By the time they had finished looking for a clear way up, all 3 members of Team 7 were feeling frustrated. Naruto took the initiative, fed up with conventional routes, and headed outside. Where are you going? Sasuke demanded as Naruto opened a nearby hallway window and jumped out. Naruto grinned and pointed a finger skyward. Up, of course. Climbing on the outside of the academy building was nothing new for Naruto, but he hadn't done it since before graduation. His new chakra control abilities made it a far easier and quicker endeavor than it had ever been before. It only took him a few seconds to scale up to the 3rd floor. It took him several more to discreetly peek and check that the coast was clear and slip a window open. The classroom was silent and empty. Naruto clambered through the window he had opened, landing lightly on the wooden floor so that he didn't make much noise. It wasn't long before Sasuke hopped through the opening Naruto had created, and he was soon followed by Sakura. Naruto slid the window shut after his 2 teammates had joined him up in the empty classroom on the 3rd floor. His fingers came away slightly smudged by dirt and grime. He smirked at them. See? That was quick, wasn't it? They ignored him and moved towards the exit. Naruto huffed indignantly, put out by their continued lack of response, before following his teammates into the hall. The hallways on the 3rd floor were far less crowded than those on the 1st had been. They only saw a handful of genin teams, though there were a few Chunin bustling about and several Jounin waiting for their teams to arrive. Without the crowds of genin hopefuls clogging the hallways, Team 7 made quick progress towards room 301. As they drew close to the double doors of the examination room, Naruto spotted Kakashi-sensei leaning against the windows, his hands shoved in his pockets. He's not late today, Naruto thought, relieved. Kakashi-sensei looked up, his uncovered eye scanning his team for a moment. I see, Kakashi-sensei said. Sakura came too, huh? Naruto blinked in confusion. What's he talking about? Now you can properly take the exam, Kakashi continued after a brief pause. Sakura made a surprised noise. What do you mean? She asked, confused. The truth is that this exam can only be taken by teams of 3, he answered. But you said taking the test was an individual choice, Sakura protested. Yeah, I said that. Sakura frowned. You lied to us? Kakashi turned his head to the right to look out the windows. That's right, he sighed. Naruto scowled, irritated by the ease his teacher admitted to lying to them. If I had told the truth, Sasuke or Naruto would have pressured you to take the exam, right? Naruto gave a short nod, ignoring the guilty spark Kakashi-sensei's words had caused. Even if it was Sakura-chan, he wouldn't let her stand in his way, not with a chance to become a chunin on the line. Sasuke said nothing in response, but there was no doubt in anyone's mind that Kakashi-sensei's words applied to him as well. Even if you didn't want to take the exam, if Sasuke asked you to, you would, even if your heart wasn't in it. For Sasuke's sake, well, Kakashi trailed off. In a better world, he could have truthfully said for Naruto's sake as well, but he wasn't certain about that. Before Team 7's mission to Waterfall, that would have been true, but he shook his head. What had happened had happened. There was no point dwelling on it. Sakura's expression had gone flat at his words, and she made a noise in the back of her throat as if in protest. He eyed her curiously. Did I say something wrong? Kakashi wondered. Sakura? The kunoichi blinked and shook her head slightly. It's nothing, sensei. She waved off her team's curious gazes. So what would have happened if only Sasuke-kun and Naruto showed up? The exam would have ended here, and they would have been prohibited from going any further. He paused, allowing the statement to sink in. Kakashi smiled. But you guys came here by your own will. I'm proud of you all. That statement was enough to bring Naruto's grin back in full force. Sakura smiled faintly, and even Sasuke's lips twitched up, however unwillingly. Kakashi moved aside from his spot in front of the doors. Now go! All right. Naruto erupted, unable to contain himself. On the other side of that door was the beginning of the Chunin exam, the next step on his road to Hokage. Let's go! The road to Hokage, Naruto decided, was a dark and hellish road. It had to be. Otherwise, how could he be faced by such a monstrosity? The first exam of the Chunin exam was a paper test, and not just any paper test, it was a fiendishly difficult paper test. Naruto stared nervously at the 9 long questions and the blank answer boxes. He reached up and wiped the sweat that dotted his brow. What am I going to do? Naruto wondered uneasily. 40 minutes had passed seemingly in the blink of an eye. The 10th question was coming up soon. He had decided to bet everything on it, but what if he couldn't answer it? If he couldn't answer the previous 9 questions, how could he possibly answer the 10th? Naruto clenched his jaw tightly. Calm down. I've got to stay calm. He would take the 10th question and pass the test. He had no other options. Cheating was out of the question. There was no way he could cheat without getting caught. What skill he possessed laid in combat, in facing a tangible enemy, not in academics or stealth. He knew next to nothing about information gathering beyond the basics, and his ability to do so stealthily was not equal to the abilities of the Chunin watching his every move. Normally, given the stakes involved, he would have tried anyway. But he couldn't do that, not with the way the rules were set up. If he tried and got caught, it wouldn't just be his problem. Sakura and Sasuke would be disqualified as well. No matter what they felt for him, they were still his team. There was no way he could allow himself to drag them down with him. All right. The scarred examiner called out loudly, drawing every eye in the room towards him. I will now give out the 10th question, Ibiki announced. Naruto's fists tightened convulsively. Here it comes. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to relax. Stay calm, he told himself. This is my only chance. But before we get to it, there's one thing I need to say. There will be a special rule for this last question. Naruto took a deep, shuddering breath. His heart thumped wildly, its beat loud in his ears. Distantly, he heard the classroom door open. The examiner said something, but Naruto paid no attention. Instead, he concentrated on slowing his breathing. He couldn't afford to get so wound up that he screwed up on the last question. He had to stay focused. Ibiki turned and took a few steps towards the windows on the left side of the room. I will now explain, the examiner said. Dark eyes glanced left, taking in the rows of nervous genin hanging upon his words. These are, he continued grimly, the rules of desperation. Naruto swallowed. Desperation? First, you all are going to decide whether or not you will take this 10th question. Choose? Some girl behind him protested loudly. What happens if we choose not to? If you choose not to take it, your points will be reduced to 0. Ibiki smirked, macabre amusement coloring his voice. In other words, you fail. Of course, your 2 teammates will fail with you. The room erupted with protests. Ibiki closed his eyes, seemingly deaf to the many complaints being hurled at him. After a moment, he continued. And now one more rule. If you choose to take it and answer incorrectly, that person will lose the right to ever take the Chunin exam again. It felt like someone had just punched him in gut. Naruto struggled to control his breathing. That's why it's a desperate rule, he thought bleakly. The gamble was an utterly desperate one. If he failed, the road to Hokage would be closed forever. But if he didn't take it, he would never advance. What kind of stupid rule is that? Kiba's voice erupted. There are guys here who have taken the exam before. Ibiki's lips curled up. He began to laugh softly, strangely amused by Kiba's words. After a few moments, his laughter stopped. You guys had bad luck, he replied. This year, it's my rules. But, his smirk widened. That's why I'm giving you a way out. Naruto leaned forward in anticipation. Those who aren't confident can choose not to take it, and try again next year. Ibiki chuckled again as the examinees stirred uneasily. He let his words sink in for a bit. Now let's begin. He continued quietly, his words nonetheless carrying throughout the room. Those who do not want to take the question, raise your hands. Once your number is confirmed, leave. Utter silence answered him as the genin struggled to make their decisions. Naruto ground his teeth together in agitation. What kind of question is it going to be? His right leg began to tap the ground restlessly. Damn it. If I get it wrong, I'll be a genin forever. I don't want that. But if I choose not to take it, Sasuke and Sakura-chan will fail as well, and I don't want that either. His fists tightened again, and his nails dug painful furrows into his palms. If I fail, I'll never become Hokage. That alone was nearly enough for him to decide. Hokage was his dream. Could he really gamble on it and risk it dying here? If I don't take it, Sasuke and Sakura-chan will fail. Sasuke was an asshole, and Sakura-chan had called him a monster and hadn't willingly spoken to him in weeks. But even so, they were his teammates. Those who abandon their comrades are worse than scum. Naruto muttered softly under his breath. Those words were a part of Kakashi's first lesson for Team 7, and Naruto had taken them to heart. To a boy who had never had a family or even friends, they had provided a solid direction and they had shaped his view of what being part of a team really meant. He would not fail them here. Yet, it was his future and his dreams that were at stake. What do I do? It was the hardest decision he had ever grappled with. He didn't know what to do. Nothing had ever prepared him to make the choice between his own dreams and his comrades. Could he, give up on becoming Hokage for the sake of Sakura and Sasuke? Could he give up on Sakura and Sasuke for the sake of becoming Hokage? It was simple, once he asked himself that. No true Hokage would give up on his comrades. His own words to Haku came back to him. A Hokage is a sacrifice. Even if he had to sacrifice himself, he could not leave his teammates behind. Besides, he had promised to Haku that he would make her proud. If he failed here, if he gave up, he would be going back on his word. More than that, he would be going back to Stu and the silent frustration and humiliation of being unable to properly provide for the two of them. He couldn't afford to stay a genin anymore. He wanted to be able to provide for the little family he had finally found. If he ran away now, he would regret it forever, whether he became Hokage or not. He couldn't run, not if he wanted to stay true to his Nindo. Naruto had to pass. That was that. For the sake of his comrades, for the sake of his dreams, and of course for Haku's sake, he had to pass. He would not run. He would not quiver in fear anymore. Naruto's eyes narrowed in grim determination as he waited, his arms folded in defiance, for the 10th question to be announced. His eyes remained steadily focused on Ibiki even as genin gave up in droves all around him. Sakura stared at Naruto's back. Why isn't he raising his hand? Naruto grinned brightly at Suna. I'm the super elite ninja who will one day become Hokage. The name is Uzumaki Naruto. Remember it. Shut up, Naruto shouted at Kakashi-sensei. I'm prepared to do anything to become Hokage. I'll surpass all of the Hokage, Naruto declared, his hands reaching up to adjust his new hitite. And then, I'll make the villagers acknowledge my existence. Sakura glanced down, unable to look at Naruto's steady back any longer. You always say, Hokage! Hokage! Like an idiot who only knows one thing. So why aren't you raising your hand? Even though you. Why did you kill the guard? You told me that if anyone discovered us, we needed to silence them. Sakura shook her head, biting her lip. Her hands curled in her lap, clutching fistfuls of fabric. I don't need to worry about him, she told herself fiercely, pushing down the uneasy feelings building up in her chest. She was confident in her own ability to answer the question. If there was one field she excelled at, it was academics, and even if Naruto screwed up, she would still be able to take the exam again. The question was her two teammates' ability to pass. Naruto being able to answer the question seemed like a long shot, and if he failed then his dream would be extinguished. Sakura shook her head again, dismissing her musings about Naruto. Sasuke-kun might have trouble as well, she thought instead, unsure of whether or not she should be worried about that anymore. Practically speaking, his abilities in this kind of test weren't exceptional. She could admit to herself that Sasuke was not the most intelligent of genin, his natural talent aside. If he couldn't use the Sharingan to glean the answer for the 10th question, he would probably be in as much trouble as Naruto. But there would no doubt be some sort of trick involved to the 10th question, given the nature of the previous 9, so perhaps he still had a chance. Even so, Sakura looked around the room. A lot of people have quit. The room had emptied out to the point where there were few genins still sitting next to each other, whereas when the exam started the room had been filled to the point of bursting with eager examinees. But the flow of genin raising their hands had slowed dramatically, and it wasn't long before it trickled off altogether. A minute then too passed in utter silence. Ibiki finally nodded to himself. I'll ask one more time, he said. Your lives are riding on this decision. Is there anyone else that wants to quit? No one raised their hands. Ibiki glanced at his subordinates, who universally nodded as he looked over them. He turned his attention back on the genin. Nice determination, he said. Then, to everyone still remaining, I congratulate you on passing the first test. Naruto dropped his pencil. Ha! Sakura stood quickly. Wait, she protested. What do you mean by that? We pass already? What about the 10th question? Ibiki chuckled in amusement. There never was such a thing. Or you could say that those two choices were the 10th question. Eh? Sakura breathed, blinking in surprise. Hey! A familiar voice complained loudly. Sakura suppressed a shiver as she remembered where she had heard that voice before. Temari, she thought grimly, her fists clenching. Then what were those 9 questions for? Temari demanded. They were pointless. They weren't pointless. Ibiki countered, his voice still light with amusement. They served their purpose. Purpose? Sakura wondered. To test your individual information-gathering ability, he explained, as if in answer to her thoughts. Information-gathering ability? Temari asked. First, as explained in the rules, success in this test is based on the whole team doing well. This puts pressure on each member not to mess things up for their teammates. But these test problems weren't ones that mere genin could answer. Because of that, I'm sure that most people here came to the same conclusion. To score points, I'll have to cheat. In other words, this exam assumed that everyone was going to cheat. For that reason, we had 2 chunin who knew the answers mixed into the crowd as targets for cheating to help you guys out. Naruto shifted uneasily. I had no idea, he thought unhappily, disgusted with himself. It was yet another thing he would have to improve on. But, Ibiki continued, his hands reaching up to undo his bandana-like hitite. Those that cheated poorly failed, of course. The knot that tied his hitite in place came undone, and he pulled it off. Why? Ibiki asked quietly. Sakura shivered at the sight of Ibiki's bare scalp. Those are scars from torture. It was a hideous, nauseating sight. Because, Ibiki continued, his voice gaining in strength and passion. At times, information is more important than life. On missions and battlefields, people risk their lives to get their hands on it. A chill went down Sakura's spine. Once again, she was staring at the reality of being ninja. Blood and torture, the value of life weighed against the value of information. That was what was waiting for her. Why am I here? Sakura asked herself. She had decided to take the exam because she wanted to change herself. She wanted to become strong so that no one would ever look upon her with such contempt again. Being happy as a civilian was nothing but a dream for her. Last night had shown her that. There was no happiness in being weak and helpless, not for her. If she stepped aside, if she cast away her identity as a kunoichi, she would regret it forever. And yet no matter how much she knew she would regret it, after seeing Ibiki's scars and listening to his words, she couldn't help but wonder. Is it really worth that? If an enemy or a third party notices you, there is no guarantee that the information you get will be accurate, Ibiki said, putting his hitai back on. I want you to remember this, he continued grimly. Getting incorrect information can cause great damage to your teammates and your village. But information in your hands can also be a powerful weapon for your comrades and your village. Naruto swallowed, completely captivated by Ibiki's words. If we had correct information, how would the mission to the wave have turned out? If we had better information, what would have happened in Taki no Kuni? After a moment, Naruto thrust those thoughts from his mind. He couldn't allow himself to think about what-ifs. He had to pay attention to Ibiki's words. He had no doubt the examiner was providing a critical lesson to him. So we had you gather information through cheating, and we kicked out those that were lacking in that field. But I still don't agree with that last question, Temari said. Ibiki spread his arms out slightly, palms facing his audience. But the 10th question is the true purpose of the first exam. What do you mean? Sakura asked. Let me explain then, Ibiki replied, putting his hands back into the pockets of his black trench coat. The 10th question, the take it or don't take it decision. Needless to say, these were painful choices. Those who choose the latter fail along with their teams, while those who choose the former could lose the chance to ever take the exam again, a true leap of faith. He turned and took several steps towards the windows. Then how about these two choices? Let's assume you all become Chunin. Your mission is to steal a secret document. The number of enemy ninja, their abilities, and their armaments are unknown. There may also be traps set all around you. Now, will you accept this mission or not? Because you don't want to die, because you don't want your comrades to be hurt, can you avoid this dangerous mission? Naruto's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Of course not, right? The answer is... Ibiki growled. No. Naruto smiled faintly, both pleased and slightly uneasy at being right. No matter what the danger, there are missions you cannot avoid. The ability to be courageous and survive any hardship, that is the ability needed to become a Chunin. Those who can't bet their fate in a critical situation, who cling to the uncertain future of there's always next year and walk away from their chance. Pieces of trash who only carry a light determination like that have no right to become a Chunin. Naruto leaned back in his chair, nodding proudly. Ibiki smiled. Those who chose to take it answered the 10th question correctly. You will be able to deal with the difficulties you will face in the future. He raised his voice. You've broken through the entrance. The first test of the Chunin selection exam is now over. His smile broadened. I wish you all luck. A noisy sigh of relief burst from Naruto. He had made it. He had passed the first exam. A giddy grin made its way onto his face. He felt happy enough to get up and start dancing. Glass shattered and a large brown ball hurtled into the exam room. Naruto tensed, his hand darting down to his thigh, and then watched in bemusement as the ball unfurled. 2 kunai thudded into the ceiling, pinning a dark brown banner into place. The kunoichi standing in front of it, dressed in a khaki trench coat, miniskirt, fishnet, and anbu shinguards, was among the strangest Naruto had ever seen. Everybody! The woman barked loudly. There's no time to celebrate, she declared. I'm the second examiner, Mitarashi Anko. Now let's go! She thrust a fist into the air. Follow me! Naruto stared up at the dark, distant canopy. These trees are huge, Naruto thought in awe, not for the first time. Massive trees loomed throughout the forest of death, some towering towards the sky, high enough to make Naruto dizzy, others twisting and deformed. Combined, their thick canopy blotted out all but a token amount of direct sunlight, which only served to augment the forest's creepiness. Everything in the forest of death was big, from the titanic trees, which were by far the largest Naruto had ever seen, to the insects. The perpetual gloom gave the forest an eerie, chilling atmosphere. The occasional screams of mortal agony and terror didn't do anything to calm Naruto's nerves either. He sighed in relief, pulling his zipper up. All done. Finally, the pressure in his bladder was gone, and no giant killer leeches had appeared while he was relieving himself. Now to get back to his team and... Naruto forced himself to relax and move naturally. The insects are quiet. He pondered the implications grimly, his mind kicking into gear as adrenaline surged through his veins. Someone's here. It was a little sign that Haku had indirectly taught him. They hadn't always restricted their spars to hand-to-hand combat, and Haku was far, far sneakier than he was. It was fortunate that she wasn't trying to kill him, at least, not anymore, since she had gotten the drop on him far too many times for comfort. Sneak attacks were dangerous. If Zabuza's creepy silent killing speech and subsequent demonstration hadn't taught him that, Haku certainly had. It had taken him a great deal of pain and bruises before he began to pick out the subtle signs of a stealthy presence nearby. They were far from foolproof signs, but they were more than Naruto had had before. When birds went silent, he had learned to be cautious. The same applied to other noisy wildlife, including certain insects like crickets and cicadas. Essentially, he had learned that he had to pay close attention to his surroundings. Doing so had let him pick out clues that had spared him the pain and humiliation of being taken by surprise by Haku, some of the time, at any rate. Those same lessons flooded into his mind when his ears heard only silence in his little slice of the forest of death. He remembered the crazy examiner lady's words and the waiver she had made them all sign, absolving her of responsibility should any of the genin taking the second test die. Anyone sneaking around in the forest was unlikely to be as gentle as Haku was if they were able to catch him flat-footed. Naruto began to walk back to the small clearing where his team was waiting for him. If his unknown guest had any ill intentions, they would probably strike while he was separated from Sakura and Sasuke. They would have to reveal themselves when they struck. That would be his chance. He just had to make sure he reacted quickly enough. His ears, straining to pick out any out-of-place noises, picked up the faint whisper of grass giving way to feet. They were quiet, but they weren't as quiet as Haku. Naruto began to form the seals for Kawarimi with as much speed and subtlety as he could muster. He finished the seals a bare handful of seconds before his attacker tried to club him in the back of his head with the blunt end of a kunai. Not trying to kill me then, Naruto realized. He would have to try and return the favor. By the time the ninja dressed in a strange yellow suit realized he had smacked a log rather than a human skull, Naruto was closing in fast on the other genin's back. His opponent pivoted, whirling to face Naruto. He caught a glimpse of a very familiar-looking device on his enemy's face as his fist hurtled towards it. A water respirator? Naruto wondered, surprised, even as his knuckles shattered the device. A kirinin? No, he amended his thoughts as he noted his foe's height. He's from the rain. Bone crunched. Naruto winced at the gruesome sound, though thankfully it wasn't any of his bones that had been broken. The rain nin dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. Naruto stared suspiciously at the prone form crumpled at his feet. That's it? Naruto wondered incredulously. He nudged the seemingly unconscious foreign ninja with his foot. After he was satisfied that his enemy really was knocked out, Naruto shook his head in bemusement. He's weak. Somehow, he felt almost disappointed. He had been expecting more from someone who had made it to the second round of the exams. Still, Naruto wasn't one to question good fortune too much. He knelt, quickly searching the aim nin for scrolls. Disappointingly, he had none. Naruto did pilfer what he could out of his enemy's equipment pouch before taking it and chucking it off into the distance. He would have taken the whole thing with him if he could have fitted onto his belt, but he had no time to figure out the strange attachment the rain ninja used. Besides, his teammates were probably becoming impatient waiting for him, and he still had to tie the guy up. Naruto jogged back into the clearing where his teammates waited. Sorry for the wait. He apologized sheepishly when he was met by twin glares. Sasuke's gaze sharpened. What happened to your hand? He demanded suspiciously. Huh! Naruto blinked. He looked at his hand, for the first time spotting the traces of blood trailing from his knuckles. Several small slivers of plastic had pierced his flesh. Abruptly, he became aware of the dull, throbbing pain in his right hand. This? Naruto asked, shaking his injured hand lightly. I got into a fight, he said casually. Sakura stood. A fight? She asked sharply. He nodded carefully, eyeing her. A fight, he repeated cautiously. It was the first time she had spoken directly to him in quite a while. Show me, Sasuke said, still watching him warily. Naruto frowned and then nodded. There was no point in picking a fight, not when they were surrounded by enemies. He led them around to his impromptu battle site, careful not to make any sudden moves that would provoke his teammates' suspicion any further. Sasuke relaxed noticeably as he took in the incapacitated aim nin. Nonetheless, he took the time to inspect the prone body carefully to make sure it was legitimate. What happened? He asked once his suspicions had been satisfied. He tried to sneak up on me. Naruto shrugged. I noticed him in time. He forced himself to stop there, suppressing the urge to brag. Sakura was staring at the rain nin with a strange look on her face, and he didn't want to risk his mouth getting him into trouble with her, not when she had spoken to him for the first time in what felt like forever. After a moment's consideration, Sasuke grunted and nodded in acceptance of his story. We'll need to decide on a password. This probably won't be the last time enemies try to attack us while we're separated. Naruto stared confused. How's a password going to help? Sasuke snorted condescendingly. Henge, he replied succinctly. Oh, Naruto realized what Sasuke was getting at. That's why. Even so, he scowled at Sasuke. How was he supposed to know what that bastard was thinking? There was no reason for him to sneer at Naruto about it. They retreated back to the nearby clearing and sat down, huddling together to decide on what the password was going to be. Sasuke, as usual, spoke without letting anyone else get a word in edgewise. I'm only going to say this once, so listen carefully, Sasuke announced abruptly. The question is, what does the ninja song Ninki say? The answer is, a large amount of loud enemies are the friends of the shinobi. Hide and remain silent. A shinobi must understand the proper time. That time is when the enemy is tired and has his guard down. That's all. Naruto frowned at Sasuke. What the hell kind of password is that? Was the bastard mocking him or something? There was no way he could remember all that after only hearing it once. Hey, Naruto said uneasily. This password. Sasuke stood, ignoring Naruto's half-hearted protest. I'll carry the scroll, he declared. Naruto leapt to his feet, ready to protest Sasuke's unilateral decision. His words died in his throat as a sharp pain erupted along his right cheek. Ouch. What? He asked, bewildered. When he reached up to touch his cheek, his fingertips came away red with blood. The wind stirred, its distant howls reaching Naruto's ears. Team 7 went still as they glanced around nervously, foreboding filling them. The howling grew louder and then, suddenly, Naruto found himself fighting to stay on his feet as the wind screamed violently. He crossed his arms protectively in front of him and hunched down, doing his best to protect his face from stray missiles of wood and rock even as he furiously sent chakra to his feet to anchor himself to the ground. A pebble hammered into his shin, sending a sharp lance of pain through his right leg. Naruto cried out involuntarily, his concentration wavering. The furious gust of wind buffeted him, pushing him back, and then finally forcing him off balance. Unable to keep himself anchored any longer, Naruto was helpless to do anything but cry out in protest as the wind tore him from the ground and threw him away from his team. The kunai violently punched through her forehead, cold steel thrusting into her brain. She was dead. Blood sprayed in wide arcs, splattering across the ground, across the nearby trees, across Sasuke's mauled corpse. Wounds bloomed like flowers in spring over her body. Pain was her world, pain and cold, and the growing darkness. She was dead. Sakura choked on a kunai, its tip buried in the back of her throat. Blood welled up in her mouth, oozed from the hole in her throat. She couldn't make a sound, couldn't do anything but drown in her own blood. She was dead. She was dead, and yet she wasn't. Sakura could only stare blankly, her eyes unable to focus on anything. Tears leaked uncontrollably from her eyes. Distantly, she was aware that she was sobbing. Deep shudders racked her body. Her limbs quivered of their own accord, terror robbing them of their strength. 100 deaths played through her mind. Her future as a shinobi unfolded before her eyes. She would die violently, painfully, alone and in terror. That was what happened when little girls played the monster's game. She would become strong? She would change herself? What a joke. There was nothing waiting for Sakura along the road called ninja. There would be no glory, no pride or recognition, no dreams fulfilled. There would be no gain at all. There was only death. Violence, pain, terror, and death were the fate of humans who named themselves shinobi. No matter how skilled they were only human. Monsters clothed in human flesh waited in the shadows for them, for her. Monsters like the thing, in front of her. If only she could get her eyes to focus or her limbs to move, she could. She could what? Run? Sakura thought, in the depths of her mind, that she might have snorted at that while she had still been alive. Instead, all her fragmented consciousness managed was a senseless, gibbering wail. How could she run when she was dead? Her body may have still been alive, but that wouldn't last for long. The monster had already killed her spirit. It had sliced her will to shreds and showed her just how pathetic she really was. Her dreams of changing herself, her resolve to stop watching the backs of others, to stop groveling, all of it was nothing more than a delusion. Her resolve had amounted to nothing. It was like the first examiner had said. Her resolve had been too light to become a chunin, much less anything else. In the face of death, all of her determination and righteous fury had crumbled like a house of cards. Sakura was only vaguely aware of the kunai coming at her, looming ever larger by the moment. She sobbed one last time before death, before a cold kunai hammered into her skull one final time. I don't want to die. Naruto groaned as he pushed himself to his feet. He looked around, dazed. Where's Sakura-chan and Sasuke? His wits returned to him in a rush as something hissed sinisterly. Naruto gaped, dumbstruck, as he gazed at the largest snake, the largest animal period, he had ever seen. The titanic serpent was a mottled brown with a pale underside. A huge forked tongue flickered out, tasting the air. Alien yellow eyes the size of the round throwing targets they used at the academy stared back at Naruto. Naruto shivered involuntarily, his hackles rising. Fear coiled uneasily in his gut. It was one thing to face other human beings, no matter how much stronger they were. Facing enormous predators was an entirely different matter. The snake uncoiled explosively, lunging at Naruto with massive jaws spread wide. Naruto leapt backwards, only to be halted by the flexible tail end of the giant snake. The tail curled around him, binding his limbs tightly. Glistening fangs dripped with an ominous liquid as the snake's head approached, jaw once again open wide. That was close, he sighed in relief as he observed the snake swallow the log. All that was left to do was wait for it to go away. When it finally did slither away, Naruto heaved an even bigger sigh of relief. But he couldn't relax for long. He had to find Sakura-chan and Sasuke. Naruto leapt down to the ground and paused, warily eyeing the direction the snake had gone. He had no desire to become snake food because he was too careless. Leaves rustled as a gray-clothed shape emerged from a large, wild tangle of bushes within leaping distance of Naruto. Naruto whirled, bringing a kunai up defensively as he glared at the stranger. Uzumaki Naruto, right? The stranger asked, his tone making it clear that it was a rhetorical question. He was older than Naruto, or at least taller and less round-cheeked, but he had to be a genin. Naruto vaguely remembered bumping into him when he had been trying to find his assigned seat at the beginning of the first exam. He squinted, trying to make out the other boy's height, but the lighting kept his allegiances a mystery. Who are you? Naruto growled, fed up with being accosted. The genin spread his empty hands out. Don't worry, the older boy said. We just want to have a little talk with you. Naruto's eyes narrowed. We? That drew a smile from the older genin. We? He nodded. Naruto whirled, his kunai whistling through the air. A dark shape manifested in his peripheral vision. Then came the pain as white-hot sparks exploded inside his skull. Naruto staggered blindly, pain and vertigo overwhelming his sense of balance. White spots filled his vision. Shit, a rough voice muttered. He's a tough little shrimp. Idiot, a girlish voice snorted contemptuously. Watch carefully. This is how you do it. Naruto tried to move, to get away, but all he managed was to stumble, barely keeping his feet under him. Darkness swallowed the white spots dancing across his eyes. There was a distant sensation, as if he were falling, and then nothing. Chapter 9 Monsters. Distantly, Naruto could hear the sounds of a small campfire ravenously devouring wood and tinder. The faint smell of smoke drifted up his nostrils, and there was a vague sensation of warmth soaking into him. Darkness veiled his vision. Above all else, there was pain. His head throbbed fiercely. Every noise was like a hammer blow to his skull. Every blurry shred of light his eyes could make out when he could stand trying to open them sent sharp needles lancing through his brain. As the scattered threads of his consciousness began their sluggish return, the pain only increased. Gradually, he became aware of the ache in his ribs and the chafing, raw sensation in his ankles and wrists. Steel wire was wrapped tightly around his ankles and his torso, cutting painfully into his bare skin, binding him to a tree. His clothes were gone, his sluggish mind helpfully summarized, and he was tied to a tree. Not good, was his brain's conclusion after a long moment of hazy contemplation. A groan involuntarily slipped from his parched throat. He's waking up, a voice observed. Startled, Naruto cracked open his eyelids once more. Stabbing pain shot through his eyes, but he persevered. He squinted, making out a blurry, writhing orange shape. Fire, he labeled it after a moment's study. A bit more focus returned to his vision, allowing him to make out 3 vague human shapes. Good timing. There was a hint of glee in the reply. I'm just about done setting everything up. A snort answered. If you weren't such a slow bastard, we could have been done by now. A sweet feminine voice spoke, the words entirely at odds with the tone. I didn't see you offering to help out. The glee was gone, replaced by irritation. Of course not. A haughty sniff spoke eloquently of what the girl thought of that notion. I have other talents. Unlike you, the unspoken implication said. Meaning you couldn't do it even if you tried. Cut it out. A new voice interrupted. We have a job to do. Naruto's vision had cleared enough to make out his captors. They looked like they were all older than him. He couldn't tell how much. Their outfits were all gray, or mostly gray, anyway, and though they differed wildly in style, they weren't distinctive of any region. Try as he might, he still couldn't figure out what village they were from. Even their accents were commonplace. Who? His query came out as a hoarse, barely audible whisper. Naruto's throat worked and he tried again. Who are you? The three went still. The tall one, the one who had emerged from the bushes to distract him from the other two, came closer. My name's Shinji. He introduced himself amiably. This, he gestured, the sleeve of his dull-colored fatigues flapping as it followed his hand up, to the curvy brown-haired kunoichi, is Mizunashi Mai. For some reason, Shinji placed special emphasis on her family name. And this? Makoto. The short, heavily muscled teen squatting by the fire grunted. Is Makoto? Shinji continued, ignoring the interruption. Why are you doing this? Naruto croaked. He smiled at Naruto, baring straight, pearly white teeth. We just want to have a little talk with you. They're not after the scrolls, Naruto realized. They had expended way too much effort on him for it to be that. A more troubling thought followed. What are they after, then? His confusion must have shown on his face. I'll get straight to the point, Shinji said. That girl you live with. What's her name? Where is she from? Alarm stole his rude, instinctive response from his throat. They're after Haku? Naruto wondered uneasily. I don't know what you're talking about, Naruto replied hoarsely. Shinji chuckled, amused. Don't lie, he scolded, wagging his index finger. We already know her name is Haku. We know that she's living with you, that she appeared in Konoha with you, that she's working at that beat-up little ramen stand. We did our homework, so don't think you can fool us. Then why am I here? Naruto growled, his voice almost completely recovered. His eyesight was close to its normal levels again. His other senses were similarly recovering. Finally, he could make out the allegiances of his attackers. 4 curving lines were stamped into the center of Shinji's setaite, creating the image of flowing water and waves. Kirigakure no Sato. Any vestiges of doubt were blown away. They were after Haku. We'd like you to confirm a few details for us, Shinji answered smoothly. That's all. Naruto set his jaw stubbornly. Don't say anything, he told himself fiercely. First, Shinji said, did you meet her in Nami no Kuni? Naruto glared at Shinji. Shinji ran a hand through his light brown hair and sighed. Was she or was she not a member of Momochi Zabuza's organization? He asked directly, cutting to the heart of the matter. I don't know what you're talking about. She has a bloodline limit, correct? She can manipulate ice? I don't know what you're talking about. Has she ever told you? Shinji's gaze grew intent. Her clan's name? Naruto swallowed. Haku's clan's name? I don't know what you're talking about. He denied again. It had never occurred to him, but now that Jonin had brought it up. How much did he still not know about Haku? He hadn't asked her much about herself. She had given him the story of how her family had died, but he still didn't know how they had lived. He didn't even know her family name. He had never even thought to ask. Naruto struggled to push down the intense wave of shame that welled up within him. Haku had given him so much, had listened to him talk about himself and his life and his interests for months, and not once had he stopped to ask her about herself except when circumstances had led him to it. How many years had he longed for someone to come home to? For how long had he dreamed of having someone who would ask him, "How was your day?" His teammates were his comrades, perhaps even his friends, but they didn't ask him about his day. Kakashi-sensei was his teacher and his commander, nothing more, though sometimes, when he did things like loan him money and show up out of the blue with vegetables, Naruto couldn't help but hope. Team 7 was filled with his precious people, but they weren't family. Iruka-sensei asked. Iruka-sensei, who asked him about his day, scolded him over his habit of talking and chewing at the same time, and fussed over Haku's presence in his life. Iruka-sensei, whom he didn't see very often anymore. Iruka-sensei asked. Iruka-sensei cared, and for that Naruto thought that maybe he was something like what a father would be like. Haku cared as well. He didn't know what role she filled in his family, but she cared. Yet he hadn't even taken the time to reciprocate. Instead, he had used her for training and to assuage his own sense of loneliness. Unthinkingly, he had treated her like a tool rather than one of his precious people. He had used her just like that Nobrow had. Pain exploded across his face, sending white spots dancing in front of his eyes. Naruto spat, seeing traces of red in his saliva as it flew towards his tormentor. He cursed inwardly as it fell short of Shinji, who had neatly stepped out of range. It's not nice to ignore people that are talking to you, Shinji said conversationally, stepping back towards Naruto. Dark brown eyes narrowed. Answer me! Naruto spat again, his glare hot with angry defiance. Shinji stepped aside, once again avoiding Naruto's wet missile. We will have you answer our questions, he growled, his affable expression slipping off of his face. One way. He gestured behind him towards Squat Boy playing with the pliers and the iron rod being heated by the fire. Or another. It took a moment for the implications to sink into Naruto's mind. He paled, fear robbing him of his voice. If he didn't tell them what they wanted to know, they were going to torture. The first examiner's hideous scars jumped to the forefront of his thoughts. That was going to happen to him. It was an almost alien thought. How could that possibly happen to him? It didn't make any sense. It couldn't be happening. Well? Unfriendly eyes watched him expectantly. All moisture had fled from Naruto's tongue. He licked his lips and swallowed, trying to conjure some saliva to wet his mouth. There was a curious trembling in his limbs. Makoto had lifted the long, thin metal bar from the fire and was simply standing there holding the end with gloved hands. The opposite end glowed orange, and the once comforting sensation of warmth against his skin abruptly felt menacing. He could talk and avoid the pliers, the red-hot metal, and who knew what else. It was just a few questions. How much harm could it cause? Besides, they were in Konoha, not Kiri. What could they do? Because, at times, information is more important than life. On missions and battlefields, people risk their lives to get their hands on it. The scarred first examiner's voice shouted from within him. Getting incorrect information can cause great damage to your teammates and your village. But information in your hands can also be a powerful weapon for your comrades and your village. Naruto closed his eyes. Fear still gripped him, casting a pall over his mind, but Ibiki's words also resonated within him. He could not answer their questions. Giving them the information they sought was out of the question. He marshaled his wavering will and tried to gird himself for what was to come. Haku. Naruto opened his eyes, meeting Shinji's expectant gaze levelly. No. The password had been a good idea. It had worked too. It hadn't really helped, but it had done its job. How could he have predicted that? His leg screamed. Sasuke gritted his teeth and did his best to ignore it. It wasn't deep enough that he would bleed to death any time soon. Shadows crowded around him, the gloom of the forest suddenly a double-edged sword that hid both him and his enemy. His eyes darted frantically around, searching for danger. Every sense he possessed was shrieking for him to run, to hide. Death's gaze, heavier than a stone coffin, rested on his back. What do I do? Sakura gasped, seemingly just coming out of her dazed state. Sasuke-kun! She exclaimed unsteadily, taking in the sight of his wounded leg. Roughly, he slapped a hand over her mouth and leaned back against the tree trunk, reducing his profile. His nerves continued to twitch at every stray sound and every hint of movement. The sensation of being hunted overwhelmed him. We have to run before we're found again, Sasuke thought, barely keeping a lid on the waves of panic threatening to drown him. But how can we run? What's the best way? Sakura frantically tried to shout at him through his hand. The uncomfortable heat of her breath against his skin would have been enough for him to draw back any other time. He ignored her, his mind furiously churning as it grasped for ideas. His arm was shoved aside. Sasuke-kun! Sakura screamed. A snake! Reflexively, he leapt from the branch as a massive mud-brown serpent lunged down towards their position. The reptile's jaw struck the branch Sasuke had just vacated, sending a shiver through the massive tree and shaking broad leaves from their branches far overhead. Its body coiled swiftly around the tree and it launched itself after Sasuke. Sasuke stared into the snake's wide-stretched jaws, his heart thumping in wild terror. There was death in those glistening ivory fangs and cold reptilian eyes, and behind it all loomed the shadow of the grass Nin whose gaze held the essence of murder. A terrified shriek burst from his throat. Get away! Sasuke screamed, hurling 2 fistfuls of shuriken into that gaping maw, desperate to put something between himself and the snake. Shuriken thrown with frantic adrenaline-fueled strength drove into the serpent's enormous mouth, tearing into the vulnerable pink flesh within. A bizarre hissing wail erupted from its throat as it collapsed, finally crashing to the ground in an avalanche of flesh and bone. Sasuke's breath came in quick, short gasps as his lungs struggled to keep up with the demand from his furiously pumping heart. He stared at the snake, watching it writhe in its death throes and then become still. Relief washed over him. A bulge formed on the side of the dead creature's throat. There was a wet crackling sound as fractures formed in its scaly skin. You can't relax for a moment. That hated voice spoke chidingly. Prey should always be trying its best to run away. The murderous Grassneen emerged from the snake's corpse, dripping with gore. Their eyes met even across the large distance between them. A long, fat pink tongue slipped through the Grassneen's lips, seemingly tasting the air in a decidedly serpentine manner. In the presence of a predator, that is. Sasuke's limbs were frozen, reduced to quivering uselessness by the weight of his fear. Thoughts poured through his mind like water tumbling over the edge of a precipice. Inevitably, they all came back to one thing. I need to run. He had to get away. Somehow, he had to escape. He had to live until the day he avenged his family. No matter what, he had to live to see that day. The Grassneen, that thing in human form, lunged. It stretched, its body elongating as it swiftly coiled around the tree trunk, slithering up towards Sasuke with blinding speed. I have to get away. But his legs would not obey him. His body was frozen, his mind blank with terror, and all he could see were yellow reptilian eyes bearing down upon him. I have to run. I have to survive. Why weren't his legs moving? Why was he still standing still, waiting for that thing to get him like some weak mouse frozen by a snake's gaze? Sasuke-kun! Kunai and Shuriken slammed into the tree's tough bark in the space between Sasuke and certain death. The Grassneen halted, glancing towards Sakura. Distantly, Sasuke could hear a choked gasp and a thump as Sakura's legs collapsed under her, overwhelmed by the impossible killing intent being directed at her. Sasuke stared at the four-bladed instruments of death that had given him a temporary reprieve. Think. What should I do? He wasn't fast enough to run from the Grassneen. He wasn't skilled enough to hide from him. Was there anything he could use as a distraction? Sakura would be no help, and he had to consider how to get her away as well. Unless, if he used her as a distraction, maybe he could. Sasuke ground his teeth together, as he forcefully put the notion aside, sickened that the thought had even crossed his mind. But he could fight, and pray that a chance manifested. Yet Sasuke knew down to his bones that fighting his enemy would mean certain death. What else could he do? Foolish little brother. That man's vile, hated voice whispered. If you want to kill me, despise me, hate me, and survive in an unsightly way, run, and cling to life. Then, one day, he had to live. No matter what the cost. Wait! Sasuke shouted, drawing the predator's attention back towards him. He took a deep breath, held it for a moment, and then blew it out softly. Slowly, he reached into his pouch and withdrew the scroll. The small, pale heaven scroll felt strangely heavy in his hand. I'll give you the scroll, Sasuke said. Please, take it and leave. Take it and leave us alone, he prayed. The Chunin exams weren't important. His pride wasn't important. Surviving and growing strong enough to take revenge was all that mattered. He had hoped to measure himself against other genin and learn through battle, but this freakish grass shinobi, he was in over his head. Sasuke could accept that. He could accept anything, as long as he met his brother again at the end of the road. The ninja from the hidden grass chuckled. I see, very smart. He, or she, or it, Sasuke couldn't tell, complimented. The only way for prey to escape a predator. That inhuman tongue emerged again, licking dark, painted lips. Is to give the predator a different meal. Take it, Sasuke repeated, tossing the scroll. His opponent caught it easily, and took a moment to carefully look over the scroll. Seconds later, the scroll turned to ashes in the grass ninja's palm. Hey! Sasuke shouted, a bolt of fear running through his body. He didn't want the scroll? If so, then that meant. What are you doing? He demanded. It's too bad. The snake-like shinobi murmured, sounding disappointed. I was hoping I would have a bit more fun with you. What are you talking about? Sasuke asked uneasily. As I had thought, the older brother really is the best one after all. Sasuke went still. Older brother? Rage rose swifter than any incoming high tide, battering against the edges of his fear. What do you mean? His question came out as a growl. The Grassneen ignored him. Well, he sighed. It's fine. There's no other choice, after all. Don't ignore me! Sasuke roared, fury restoring his will to fight. The creepy shinobi before him had some kind of connection with Itachi. His opponent's strength didn't matter in light of that. He had to find out what the Kusanine knew. Yellow reptilian eyes met Sharingan crimson. Sasuke choked, control over his limbs once again leaving him. Why am I so weak? He wanted to scream, to cry, to beat his opponent to death with his bare hands until his knuckles bled. He was so weak. Why was he so weak? After all this time, after all the training he had done, this was all he amounted to? Trembling in fear of a single enemy, unable to move just because of meeting his foe's eyes? How could he beat Itachi like this? At this rate. He couldn't do it. It was impossible. If this was how far he had come in the years since his family had been slaughtered, catching up with Itachi was an impossible dream. I'm weak. It was too bitter to bear. I need power. Otherwise, he would never be able to avenge the Uchiha clan. Justice would forever be denied to the spirits of his family. I need power. He was walking the wrong road. Everything he had done was wrong. Sasuke finally understood. He couldn't gain the strength he needed if he continued on the path he was walking. Sasuke-kun, his terrifying enemy murmured. I'm disappointed in you. Casually, he began forming seals. But even so, a chilling grin revealed fangs no normal human could possess. I want you. Before Sasuke could even begin to comprehend that statement, a pale face was flying towards him with astonishing speed, long incisors bared in a gesture eerily reminiscent of a snake's final lunge to swallow its prey whole. Fangs pierced his skin, sending sharp waves of agony through his neck. The teeth withdrew. A breath later, the monster's pale, extended neck began to retract. My name is Orochimaru. The retreating head hissed. Seek me, and gain power. A scream tore its way out of Sasuke's chest. Every nerve in his body seemed to light up with pain, all of it radiating from the place where he had been bitten. He slumped to his knees, his legs too weak to support his weight any longer. His consciousness was fading, unable to hold against the overwhelming waves of agony battering against it. He toppled forward, his vision fading to black. The last thing he heard was Sakura's shrill scream. Sasuke-kun! The forest of death was alive with noise. The sound of wildlife, both ghastly and mundane, was a near constant companion, as was the subtle groaning of trees and the occasional whisper of leaves. Sporadically, screams and the sounds of combat rang out over the native sounds of the forest. Mai listened intently to the background noises, her senses warily attuned to the environment around her team's makeshift camp. With Shinji and Makoto paying so much attention to the little blonde genin they had captured, it was up to her to make sure no one got the drop on them. It also meant she didn't have to pay too much attention to what was going to happen to their captive. She had to admire his guts when he spat at Shinji and refused to talk, even though her stomach twisted in revulsion at the sight of the eager grin on Makoto's face when it became clear he would get to have his fun. Shinji sighed and ran a hand through his unruly brown hair, his angry expression retreating. You're sure? He asked the bound Konoha genin, sounding regretful that matters couldn't be resolved without further coercion. Maybe he even meant it. Mai had long given up trying to understand her tall, handsome teammate's mind. His mood shifted like quicksilver, but she was never certain if he meant anything that he said or if the expressions he wore on his face were genuine. The blonde genin spat again. Shinji nodded to himself, and then roughly hit the boy in the gut. We'll have to gag him, he said conversationally to Makoto while their captive wheezed for air. We wouldn't want anyone to follow the sound of his screams, after all. Right, Makoto groused, his expression petulant. The stocky boy rose and moved to pry the captive's jaw open so that Shinji could gag him without being bitten. Mai averted her face, hiding her grimace from her teammates. Makoto enjoyed causing pain, and his desire to become an interrogator was driven by that and that alone, despite his insistence that he wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. The difference was that while his father was a professional, a surgical instrument that got results, Makoto was just a boy who delighted in cruelty. He was an idiot who hadn't grown out of pulling the legs off helpless insects for amusement, and Shinji was an idiot for letting Makoto have a go at their target. He would probably accidentally kill the boy in his enthusiasm instead of extracting any useful information from him. Mai shifted her weight uncomfortably, remembering the last time Makoto had been given free rein to use the macabre toys he carried around with him. When you're ready to talk, just nod your head, okay? Shinji said cheerfully. The boy, Uzumaki Naruto, if she remembered their teacher's briefing correctly, simply looked at Shinji with eyes filled with loathing. Shinji nodded as if hearing a favorable reply and turned to Makoto. Get started. Makoto grinned happily and stepped towards Naruto. Finally! Mai. Shinji turned his head to look at her. You should go and check the traps around the perimeter. Right, she said coolly, ignoring the way his eyes hungrily swept over her chest and then slipped downward. She turned and began to walk away, casually flipping her long chestnut hair in a haughty gesture, struggling to keep her disgust and discomfort locked tightly out of sight. Her skin crawled as she imagined his gaze on her ass as she walked away. She subtly tried to tug her miniskirt down without calling attention to her actions. Mai hated the necessity of it, but she had been trained as a kunoichi, and that included using those disgusting, leering gazes and the thoughts behind them to her advantage. It had saved her life more than once. Her body could be a useful distraction against male ninja, who accounted for the majority of active shinobi, and in close combat it had occasionally given her the edge she needed to win against stronger opponents. Of course, it would never work on any high-ranking ninja worth his salt, but against males with less control and seasoning it had proven useful. So she kept wearing outfits that revealed far more than she was comfortable with, and endured the looks she garnered with forced indifference. In the end, it was just another tool in her arsenal, and she would be a foolish kunoichi to throw it away. That didn't stop her uneasiness with it though. She may have been a ninja, and she liked to think that she was a good one for her level, but that didn't mean she was safe. In Kirigakure, strength was the only law that really mattered. There were still a lot of shinobi that surpassed her, and until she was strong enough to deter them she would never be truly secure. She had spent her early years with her mother, and had seen a lot of women who sold their bodies. Rape was nearly a fact of life for them, though it wasn't nearly as common, or perhaps it was merely less obvious, in the higher-priced circles her mother had traveled through. Nonetheless, Mai had learned to fear it before she could even comprehend it. Once her body had begun to change in earnest, those ingrained fears had steadily grown into a silent terror that stalked her through her dreams and into her waking mind. It was hardly an uncommon fate among women in the country of water, and kunoichi didn't always fare better despite their advantages. There were far fewer female ninja than male, after all, and as long as a team's ability to perform was not unduly affected, Kirigakure as a whole could care less what its kunoichi often suffered. Only efficiency mattered. If a kunoichi was hurt to the point she could not perform her duties, then there were punishments. If not, it was like it had never happened. Things were sometimes different if a foreign ninja was the culprit. After all, that cast shame on the village as a whole, and the Mizukage was nothing if not proud. But internally, strength meant everything in Kirigakure. If you weren't strong enough to prevent it from happening, you deserved it. That was what they were taught. It was just the law of nature. It was the way the world worked. She firmly believed that she had only avoided that fate, so far, because of chance, because she trained relentlessly to gain the skills necessary to protect herself from her peers, and because of who her father was. Her father's name was perhaps the strongest of the three. Mizunashi. Her father's name, her name, and perhaps the only thing he had ever given her since he had knocked up her mother. It was the first time that name had done her any good. For the majority of her life, it had only proved to be a curse. Just because she was his blood didn't mean he held any affection for her. She had been an accident, the result of an ambitious young man's lustful dalliance with the famed courtesan, whore, Mai thought in her more bitter moments, and chance. The outer perimeter traps were undisturbed. Mai began making her way around, her senses alert for any signs of potential foes, to check the second layer. A faint, curious noise caught her ears, one she studiously ignored. She was familiar with the sound of an agonized scream muffled by a makeshift gag. Makoto had gotten too enthusiastic again, too eager to hear the cries his hobby produced in his victims to practice restraint. Gagged or not, it wouldn't be hard for enemies to find them if he kept that up. She put the thought out of her mind, unwilling to dwell on it lest her imagination take over and run with it. Logically, she understood the necessity of getting the information out of this boy in the quickest way they could. They needed to know if one of the Mist's old, cursed bloodlines had escaped the purge and fallen into Konoha's hands. Their teacher was counting on them to acquire critical information. Even so, there were better ways to do it than letting Makoto have his fun. Don't think about it, she told herself grimly. Mai focused her attention back on the task at hand, making sure none of the traps and tripwires had been disturbed. When she was satisfied that everything checked out, she reluctantly made her way back to where her teammates were. Had she turned around in that instant, her eyes might have caught the quick, faint flash of light reflecting off of glass. Naruto shrieked wildly, thrashing and twisting madly against the wires that bound him. Fresh blood dripped down his skin from where the steel bindings cut through his skin, but he hardly registered it above the sensation of his own flesh being cooked by red-hot iron. The acrid smell of burning skin and flesh filled his nose. The sound of his skin sizzling seemed to overwhelm the screams of pure agony rising from his raw throat. His entire being revolved around the blunt, burning instrument and the small, coin-sized area of flesh that it was pressing against. There was no room for thought or emotion. All that was left in him was pain beyond anything he had ever known. The iron was withdrawn after an eternity of suffering, but Naruto kept screaming. The burning didn't stop, wouldn't go away. He writhed frantically, but there was no escape from the heat that seared through his skin, deep into his flesh. Naruto was drowning in an ocean of anguish. The sensation of being cooked alive piece by piece was only the main instrument in a symphony of shrieking wounds. Even though his tormentors had stopped for the moment, pain continued to ravage his oversaturated nerves. Eventually, enough of the scattered threads of his sanity returned for him to realize that he was being given a respite for some reason. The pain wasn't gone, not even close, but for the moment nothing new was being added to it. He could hear the voices of his enemies arguing, though his fuzzy mind couldn't even begin to process what they were saying. Fear flooded into Naruto. His body quivered with the terrified anticipation of more torture. His mind was racked with it, as he dreaded the moment the nightmare would start all over again. Beneath it all, wrath seethed like an angry beehive. Naruto stared hatefully at his tormentors through bruised, swollen eyes. If he survived this, and he would survive this, somehow, they would die. No matter how long it took, no matter how hard it was, he would hunt them down and break them into pieces. They were going to die. He was going to kill them. Shinji gestured angrily. Naruto flinched, his anger submerged beneath a wave of terror once more, and closed his eyes. When nothing happened, he opened them again, peering fearfully through his swollen eyelids. They were still arguing. Slowly, carefully, Naruto tried to move his arms. Waves of fresh agony lanced through him. Fresh blood carved warm trails down his chilled, sweat-soaked skin. The wire that bound him to the tree had cut deeply through his skin during his frenzied struggles. Trying to move his legs nearly made him sob aloud. Naruto's sword jaw quivered. He was utterly helpless. He couldn't move at all. There were no tools he could use and no techniques he could fall back on. How could he possibly survive? At this rate, I'm going to. He didn't want to complete that thought. It wasn't possible. He was going to be Hokage, damn it! How could he possibly die here? But reality was merciless. He was going to die. Naruto's body tensed again, his muscles tightening despite the pain it caused him. Hot, red rage filled him, and he glared with renewed force at the two arguing Kirinin. He hated them. He hated them more than he had ever hated anything or anyone. It was an ugly, dark feeling. It reminded him of the days before Iruka-sensei, Team 7, and Haku. It had seemed like the world had reviled him, so he had loathed it in return. But the hatred bubbling up within him now was more intense and specific. It was utterly murderous. Naruto had never felt such a concentrated urge to kill before. The feeling was so strong that it seemed almost palpable. In the end, it was also futile. There was no escape. At best, he would be able to spit in their eyes before they finished with him. That knowledge didn't stop him from straining to figure out a way out. But no matter how hard he thought or how fiercely he struggled against his bonds, no way to escape emerged. Naruto gritted his teeth and continued to struggle against his bonds, trying to endure the waves of pain and panic that battered him. A flashlight caught his eye, somehow managing to get through even his pain-hazed mind. His captors turned towards it, apparently they had seen it too. There was a faint sound behind him, like a shuriken hitting wood, and Naruto abruptly found himself falling forward as the wires came undone behind him. He staggered forward, barely keeping his unsteady legs beneath him. Shouts rang out nearby, followed by the clash of steel as the two missed genin deflected a barrage of shuriken, but Naruto hardly registered the noise. I'm free. The realization came quickly, along with a wave of dark exultation. Naruto stumbled forward, his legs trembling and shrieking with pain as they strained to support his weight, his hazy vision focused intently on the broad back of his closest tormentor. He was dizzy and weak from all the blood he had lost, and the pain would have been enough to cripple him at any other time, but now, he had something he had to do, no matter what. 3 more stumbling steps brought him within Mikoto's range. No thoughts traveled through Naruto's head. He had no plan. All he had left was an overwhelming, primal urge that drove him forward despite the agony of moving. Kill. Another step. Someone shouted. It sounded like gibberish to Naruto's ears, but the broad, muscled back of his target began to turn quickly. Now. Instinct bubbled from his gut to his brain. It was time to pounce. Naruto leapt. Mikoto's fist came around, blindingly swift, meeting Naruto's face. Bone crunched and Naruto's vision went white. But it didn't matter. The pain was nothing. The fact that he couldn't see meant nothing. All that mattered was kill. He slammed into his sturdily built enemy, driving him to the ground, fluidly drawing his enemy's kunai from its holster as he did so. Mikoto grunted as he hit the ground, his muscles tensing to throw the Konoha off of him, but it already too late. It had been too late ever since the first blow, the first cut of the knife. Kill. Naruto slammed the pilfered kunai down into Mikoto's left eye. The sound of bone crunching, giving way to steel, the wet noises Mikoto's eyeball made as it burst like a water balloon popping. It was like music, a distant symphony that filled his stomach with comforting warmth. Move, instinct whispered. Unthinkingly, he threw himself forward, rolling away from the corpse and just barely escaping the barrage of shuriken that sliced through the air just above Makoto's prone body. Getting to his feet required a titanic effort of will. He couldn't think, could barely move. Pain and weakness consumed his flesh. But he had to move. If he stopped, he would die. If he stopped, then he couldn't. Kill. Yes. There was still something to be done before he could rest. Naruto pulled himself upright, overriding his body's refusal to comply, and eyed his prey, growling. A kunai sailed through the air, hissing. Naruto almost laughed at the idea that a single kunai could stop him from bringing down his prey and shredding him to pieces. Contemptuously, he moved to bat it aside. Hissing? That wasn't right, but he didn't know why. His thoughts were out of focus, blurry, as if he was peering at them through an opaque window. Then an almighty flaming hand picked him up and tossed his broken body through the air with explosive force, and he understood. Explosive, seals. A black shroud descended over his mind. There were no more thoughts, no pain anymore, even though he knew that he had just broken many more bones, that his flesh had been burned and blackened. Somewhere far away, his body was screaming with agony as his weak flesh failed. Except, something was still speaking within him. There was still one thought in his head. Kill. A thunderous boom sounded from the makeshift camp. Mai staggered, her ears ringing, and looked around wildly in confusion. She looked towards the campsite, sapphire eyes taking in the heavy cloud of dust kicked up in the aftermath of an explosion. Moments later, her wits returned and she quickly moved to conceal herself. Quietly, carefully, she slinked towards the site of the explosion. A shout reached her ears, followed by an eerie scream of rage and pain that sent shivers down her spine. Nonetheless, Mai kept moving forward and it wasn't long before she reached the camp. Mai quickly concealed herself against a tree before cautiously peeking into the little clearing. Shinji was crouched warily in a combat-ready position, his eyes trained on the opposite side of the camp. But where was Makoto? Mai followed Shinji's stunned gaze, which was fixed on the blonde boy they had captured on the orders of their teacher. A whimper slipped through her lips. Red chakra visibly bubbled over his skin, which was hideously blackened and cracked and bleeding. Blood dripped from his nail-less hands, and steam was rising from the raw red wounds across his body. Long incisors gleamed in his snarling mouth. The marks on the boy's cheeks were significantly larger and darker than before. Most intimidating of all were his eyes, which were like alien, murderous blood-stained rubies. Revulsion and fear wrestled in her stomach. A bloodline limit, Mai thought, stricken. A terrible, disgusting mutation of human genetics meant only to kill was before her. A monster. She had heard the stories, of course. Every ninja in Kirigakure knew about the wars that bloodline users had brought to the country, about the destruction and devastation they had caused and the purge that had ended it all. She knew that some of the shinobi she had seen in the first exam had borne bloodline limits, the result of Konoha's filthy, short-sighted acceptance of such ninja. But she had never heard of such an evil bloodline as the one she saw in front of her, one that could make the very air around her seem thick with malevolence. Her heart pounded furiously in her chest. Run! Mai's instincts screamed. A lump of brown and gray caught her eyes. The slow realization that she was looking at Makoto's corpse crept up on her. She stared at Makoto's broken corpse numbly, almost clinically, uncertain as to what she should feel. The cause of death was most likely the kunai buried in his skull, and the awkward position of his corpse was most likely a side effect of the earlier explosion. Makoto is dead. She hadn't liked him, had hated him much of the time they had spent together, but still. What is this feeling? Her teammate was dead. A deep, bone-rattling noise filled the area, and it took Mai a moment to realize that the thing was growling. 3 kunai sliced through the air, slamming deep into Thing's body. Thin trails of smoke wafted upwards, accompanied by a sizzling noise. The monster seemed to realize it at the same time she did, for at that instant it roared, sending a pulse of chakra out that was so strong that she could see it distort the air around the creature. The kunai were ejected from the monster's body, seemingly of their own volition, but the seals were already lit. Mai whirled, diving to duck fully behind the tree. A second later the 3 explosive seals exploded. When the aftermath of the explosion had settled, Mai could only look around fearfully, deafened by the sound of the blast. Where her dead teammate's body had rested, there was only a crimson smear. Chunks of Makoto had been scattered all around the campsite like little random touches of crimson from the brush of an insane god. Every time her eyes glanced past a patch of blood or a chunk of her teammate, she could feel the bile trying to claw its way up her throat. A gray shape hurtled through the air and hammered into a nearby tree with an audible crunch, sending bits of bark flying. Mai stared, stunned, as her last living teammate flopped drunkenly, pinned to the tree trunk by the monster, blood leaking from his mouth. Her hands flew up and desperately covered her mouth as she tried to contain her scream of terror. Those terrible eyes turned towards her. Shinji's body fell to the ground as the hand that had been thrust through his stomach, nailing him to the tree, was withdrawn with a sickening wet noise. Mai tried to run, every part of her being shrieking at her to flee for her life. Her lithe, well-trained legs collapsed limply beneath her. There was another growl, close enough to draw another shriek from her throat and drag jagged fingernails down her spine. She flailed in panic as it drew closer, her arms and legs desperately pushing her away from certain death. Slowly, relentlessly it drew closer. Her back met firm resistance. Mai's limbs scrambled against the dark, giving soil for a moment, her mind unable to understand. Rough bark scratched painfully against her back. A tree, she realized, torn between laughing hysterically and crying. It was over. A blood-stained monster loomed over her. The hands that had killed her two teammates flexed, drawing her attention to the long, sharp claws that now crowned them. Mai stared upwards, her throat closed by absolute terror. Her vision blurred. Warmth sliced down her cheeks. Tears? How long had it been since she had cried? Years, certainly. Not since that whore had hung herself over the balcony. Not since her mother had died. Mai shut her eyes tightly. Silent sobs racked her body, and she drew her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms tightly around her legs as she waited for the end to come. Maybe she would see her mom again. A girl was crying. Consciousness returned slowly to Naruto, oozing back like molasses. His whole body hurt. His skin was unbearably hot, damp, almost steaming, and so tender that moving felt like it would burst it open. Beneath his skin, blood scorched as it flowed through his veins and arteries. His whole face ached, and his eyes throbbed in concert with his heartbeat. The tips of his fingers were alive with pain, especially beneath his fingernails. My fingernails? He remembered the agony as his nails were ripped from his hands, one by one. Phantom pains erupted across his body as the memories came back. Here, where hot iron had been held against his skin, cooking it, creating a sensation that his mind could only shy away from recalling to keep him from madness. Slashes across his skin, there and there, where a blade had been slowly applied. In his chest was the ache of a broken rib, where the tall one had kicked him angrily when he had begun to tune it all out, to retreat into the safety of his mind. Naruto remembered, and those memories brought back terror so thick he could choke on it, as well as a hot, burning hatred. There was something else, too. In the back of his mind loomed a frozen tidal wave of wrath and destruction, just waiting for the moment to come crashing back down. The ache in his face was familiar. He had felt it once before, when his facial structure had shifted, when his canines had grown too long for a human mouth and his jaw changed to accommodate them. The blank hole in his memories was familiar. How had he escaped? What had happened to his tormentors? The strange itching, burning sensation in his veins was familiar. The last time he had felt it was in the aftermath of Sasuke's supposed death. His hands were slick with blood again. Kyuubi. Naruto exhaled as he made the sickening connection. That chakra. It'd be best if you kept your temper in check from now on. It seems like your anger brought it out, but if you can't control yourself well while you're using it, well, you might end up hurting more than your enemies. Kakashi-sensei's warning came back to him. He had lost control over himself. Naruto's own mind and body had, for a time, not been his anymore. Fear surged up again at that chilling thought. Naruto clenched his jaw, battling it back. Control, he thought fiercely. He had to control himself, to control his mind and his emotions so that it wouldn't happen again. This time he had been lucky. Only his enemies had been hurt, and the dark power of the demon had probably saved his life. But in the future, if he lost himself while his comrades were around, the image of Sakura-chan's broken body, of Sasuke nothing more than a smear against the ground, of Kakashi-sensei's limp corpse flashed in front of his eyes. His vision cleared, and Naruto finally began to pay attention to the weeping, shivering girl at his feet. As far as he could tell, she was unharmed aside from a few scratches and bruises. He felt vaguely relieved by that, enemy or not. If he had come to after tearing off her head, he knew that it would have weighed on him forever. There was no more anger left for him to muster as he looked at the terrified form of the girl. She was definitely older than him. Her well-developed attributes told him that clearly enough, and she had been part of the team that had hurt him, but he still couldn't help feeling pity for her. It was stupid. He knew that. Feeling pity for the enemy, he was an idiot. If the situation had been reversed, she probably wouldn't have hesitated. Kakashi-sensei would scold him for it, and Sasuke would scoff derisively. But he wasn't them. Naruto sucked in a deep breath, his eyes lidding as he thought. What do I do? What would I regret the least? He took a step back, exhaling. Run! The girl went still. Run! Naruto repeated. Slowly, her head emerged from the embrace of her arms. Dark brown hair fell like a curtain across her pale, stunned face. Naruto swallowed as he met her glistening eyes, the utter terror and the spark of bewilderment in them raising a tumult of emotions within him. He tried to ignore the odd feeling of shame he felt for inspiring such terror in anyone. That wasn't the kind of person he wanted to be. Instead, he focused on keeping his expression closed as he met her gaze levelly. Run! He said again, his voice flat. He couldn't afford to let any sign of his pain or exhaustion show. Cautiously, like a rabbit inching away from a still wolf, she unfolded her limbs and stood, her back scraping against the rough tree trunk behind her. Those wide, startlingly blue eyes remained fixed fearfully on him. Didn't you hear me? Naruto growled, leaning forward slightly. Run! He shouted. She bolted, her long legs blurring beneath her, as she desperately fled. Within moments she had disappeared from his sight. As he watched her flee, it belatedly occurred to him that letting her run away before trying to get some answers from her was probably a bad idea. But there was no way he could catch up to her in the state that he was in. Nonetheless, Naruto heaved a sigh of relief, wincing at the sharp pain in his chest that caused. If she had sprang for him instead of away from him. He had been lucky enough as it was. No point in thinking about it, he told himself. He looked around, studiously avoiding looking at the corpse that he had caught a glimpse of in the corner of his eye, trying to figure out which direction he needed to go in to find his team. Eventually, Naruto began walking unsteadily towards where he hoped his team was, or at least had been. Time stretched. The sounds of the forest faded into undistinguishable background noise. Shit. It hurts. He needed to find somewhere to hide and rest. If another team found him in his condition, Naruto would have no chance at all. He could barely walk in a straight line, fighting was out of the question. But he had to find his team. What if they needed his help? That wind had been unnatural, and an enemy with a technique that strong had to be dangerous as hell. He couldn't stop. Just wait, Sakura-chan. All he had to do was keep putting one foot. Sasuke. In front. I'll be there in a bit. Of the other. Sasuke's labored breathing dominated Sakura's hearing. Anxiously, she pulled the sweat-dampened cloth from his forehead and checked his temperature, then moved her hand down to his neck to check his pulse. His heartbeat was dangerously fast, and his skin radiated feverish heat. She replaced the cloth and slumped back, sighing. Sakura didn't know what to do. She had found a concealed, somewhat defensible spot beneath the massive, exposed roots of one of the Forest of Death's titanic trees. What little first aid she could apply she did. Traps and makeshift tripwires had been set around the perimeter. Once she had finished setting them up, she had started to run out of steam. There was little left she could do except watch over Sasuke and pray. Exhaustion weighed heavily upon Sakura. Dawn was coming, and with it the end of their first night in the forest. She had not slept since she had woken up to take the test. But no matter how heavy her eyelids were, she could not allow herself to fall asleep. Sasuke's life could very well depend on her. Instead, she occupied herself with guarding her incapacitated teammate, occasionally checking his vital signs, and trying to think. But no matter how hard she thought, Sakura could not think of a good way out of the situation Team 7 had fallen into. Naruto was gone. She had no idea if he was even still alive. Sasuke was unconscious, and the seal on his neck was clearly bad news. Thinking about the seal brought her thoughts back to their encounter with the bizarre, utterly terrifying Kusanine. Just the thought of it gave her chills. The Kusanine was the most horrifying shinobi Sakura had ever encountered, more like a nightmare given flesh than a living, breathing ninja, and he was after Sasuke. Sakura could hardly imagine why a monster like that would be interested in any genin, Uchiha or not, but it had apparently saved their lives. He hadn't intended to kill them from the very beginning. His only objective had been to toy with Sasuke and leave his gift behind. The chillingly reptilian Grassnine was not done playing around with her teammate, either. He would have killed her if that wasn't the case. The only reason she was still alive was so that Sasuke wasn't killed while he was helpless. It was the only reason she could think of. She had been utterly helpless again. She hadn't been able to do anything at all. The only reason she was alive was because she had a use, and because she just wasn't worth killing. There was nothing she could have done against a shinobi of that level. She wasn't even sure what that level was, only it was clearly far above her, but it still filled her with bitter feelings. The reason she had entered the Chunin exam was because she wanted to become strong, because she wanted to change herself. But despite her resolution, nothing had changed at all. Her hands curled into fists. Sakura winced, her eyes watering, and she put a hand over her eyes. The sun? Dawn had finally come. Light pierced through the forest canopy, driving back the gloom of the forest. There was a subtle noise behind her, like the faint sigh of grass moving to the wind's will. Except, Sakura tensed, her hand slowly, inconspicuously removing a kunai from her holster. There's no wind right now. She sprang upwards, whirling as she did so. Gray shapes made themselves known in her peripheral vision. Sakura launched the kunai the moment she saw them, even before she had fully completed her turn. No allies of Team 7 had been wearing gray clothes when they had entered the forest. Otogekure, her mind made the connection almost instantly the moment she saw the musical note stamped into their hitate. It was the same team that had attacked that friendly older genin, Kabuto, before the first exam had started. There was a loud clang as her kunai was deflected by something metal. Sakura narrowed her eyes, studying the stooped Oto genin with the strange brown mantle. A metal bracer? Sakura wondered. The metallic noise when her kunai had met his forearm meant that there was something metal beneath his long gray sleeves. Sloppy, he commented, sounding amused. His bandage-covered head tilted. Not enough sleep? Sakura set her jaw firmly, trying to contain the quiver that ran through her. What do you want? She asked coldly. We're here to see Sasuke-kun, their evident leader replied smoothly. Would you wake him up? What do you want with him? Sakura demanded heatedly. We don't even have a scroll anymore. Can't you see that he's in no condition to fight? A bolt of icy fear lanced down her spine. What do I do? The Oto genin looked taken aback for a moment. Finally, Bandage had replied. Even so, we'd like to have a few words with Sasuke-kun. Words? The brown-shirted boy slouching on the rocks sat up straight, scoffing. He smirked maliciously at Sakura. We're not here to talk. We're here to fight. Humph. The sound Kunoichi rolled her eyes and folded her arms. Our orders are to... Kin! Bandage had interrupted, cutting off her words. Sakura reached into her equipment pouch and pulled out one of her few remaining kunai. Their orders. They're not here for a scroll? She shifted her weight and settled into a defensive posture, keeping her eyes focused on the three Otonin. What are your orders? Sakura demanded. What does the sound want with Sasuke-kun? It's nothing, the leader said smoothly. We're just here to see if the Uchiha live up to their reputation. It didn't matter what they wanted with Sasuke. There was no way Sasuke could fight in his condition, and there was no way she could let the sound genin do anything to her unconscious teammate. She stiffened her spine resolutely, ignoring the fear that clamored from the dark corners of her mind, whispering all of her doubts and fears over and over again so that she could never forget. I can do this, Sakura told herself. You're going to die, the whispers said. She glared at the three foreign genin, willing her body to stay still, her face to stay calm. Betraying her fear would be disastrous. This is boring, the brown-clad genin complained darkly, hopping off of his perch on the rock. I'll kill some time with this girl, he commented to his teammates, his eyes never leaving Sakura's. And then we'll wake this Sasuke guy up and play with him. The Kunoichi, the one the leader had called Kin, snorted derisively. I don't think you'll kill very much time with her, she commented, eyeing Sakura. Do what you want, the slouching leader sighed. Sakura tensed, quashing the fury that had risen in response to the other Kunoichi's contemptuous appraisal. I'll protect Sasuke-kun, she thought resolutely, determined to prove herself. This time she would. You will fail. No. She had to be capable of that much. If she couldn't even defend her teammates when they were down, even if it was 3 against 1, what was she worth? Nothing. Who was she kidding? Even if it was 3 against 1? Even if it was 1 against 1, she probably couldn't succeed. Sakura could barely remember the last time she had won a fight, and she had never won one that actually mattered. She wasn't a true ninja at heart. She wasn't strong, not in her body or her heart. Her intelligence had never once made a difference against the few real foes she had faced. Outwitting Naruto in training was nothing like outthinking an enemy willing to cut her down. How could she possibly protect herself, much less her teammates? How could she survive this, much less defend Sasuke? She was worthless. Sakura blinked rapidly, struggling to keep her thoughts from showing, and in an instant her enemy attacked. Metal clanged as Sakura smoothly deflected the shuriken with her kunai, unwilling to move from her defensive crouch. A moment later, her opponent sped past the pebble that she had placed as a marker. Her kunai twitched, and the wire was cut. The log trap descended in a blur, and the charging genin let loose a startled curse a moment too late. Ninja and log collided explosively, sending a shower of dirt and wood chips flying throughout the area. The sense of triumph that should have followed was held back by foreboding. What caused that explosion? Sakura wondered nervously, trying to make out anything through the dust. The log trap she had set up definitely should not have exploded. The spike pit nearby didn't have any explosives in it either. A powerful wind blasted into Sakura, knocking her over and sending her rolling backwards. As soon as she regained control of her tumble, she used her momentum to roll to her feet again. Sakura gritted her teeth, struggling to shake off her fear, and braced herself in case another blast hit her. The wind she had just been hit with reminded her of the technique the grass nin had used to separate Team 7. The dust had finally cleared enough for her to see her opponent again. His dark eyes met hers, his expression smug. "How did you like that?" her enemy taunted, his palms still pointing towards her. "There's a tube in his hand? What is he?" He was an enemy ninja wielding a strange but devastating technique that she did not comprehend. Whatever else he was did not matter. Once again, her knowledge let her down. She had no idea what techniques her enemy possessed. It didn't seem to be futon jutsu, and she had never heard of wind techniques that made use of tubes in the body. She didn't know her enemy, and she had nothing in her arsenal to surprise him. Even if she was able to work something out with only bunshin, kawarimi, henge, the traps she had left, and her remaining tools, there was still the matter of his teammates. Her enemies outnumbered her 3-1. Even one foe was too much for her to deal with. How could she deal with 3? A failure like her couldn't possibly do it. She had been useless against the Onikyudai and helpless against zabuza. Her contribution to the mission in Taki no Kuni had ended catastrophically and left her with nightmares that still hadn't faded. She had bowed her head to a bully again, pressed her face into the dirt of her own wool out of fear, even though she was a kunoichi. How could anyone expect her to defend herself, much less her unconscious teammate? It wasn't possible. It just wasn't possible. But disgust welled up deep within her. Bile rose in her throat. The bitter taste in her mouth was more than she could bear. She was worthless again. She was helpless again. But why was she even here? Why was she in the Chunin exams, risking her life for something she didn't really want? To change yourself? That was right. She had entered because she hated herself, because she wanted to change, to step forward and become something more than she was. She wanted to change. But what could she do? What do you want to do? She wanted to change. How? She didn't know. How could she change? How did a person change themselves? What path did she need to take to become the person she wanted to be? Sakura had no answers, only questions. In the end, she really didn't know anything important at all. She didn't know who she was or where she was going. She didn't know why she was a ninja, why she fought, or what she was fighting for. What had set her on this path? Where did she want to go, and what did she want to do? Sakura didn't know anything. She didn't have any answers, only questions. She didn't know what she wanted, why she was here, or where she wanted to go anymore. Sakura was frightened. She was terrified of her foes, of the situation she was in, of failing yet again and adding to the many failures that already threatened to bury her. She was scared of death. She had seen it in the grass nin's eyes, tasted it, felt it, and the knowledge of death would never leave her again. Most of all, she was afraid of herself and everything that she was not and might never be. But right now, Uchiha Sasuke was behind her, unconscious, just as helpless as her for once in his life. His life depended on her. Sasuke's life rested in Sakura's weak, trembling hands, whether he wanted it or not. Uchiha Sasuke had been her crush, her dream, her goal, and he had crushed everything she had offered him like she was so much trash. Despite all of that, even if there were no ties like the ones she had dreamed were between them, even if all he saw her as was trash, they were still teammates. Those who abandoned their teammates were worse than trash. Kakashi-sensei had taught her that. Taki no Kuni had taught her that. Naruto, the teammate she had abandoned, had taught her that. Never again. She wanted to change. She wanted to be better than she was. What do you want to do? Sakura wanted to fight. She wanted to fight and she wanted to win. She wanted to defend her teammate, to be better than she had been, to take a step forward towards becoming the kind of person she wanted to be. That was right. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't understand the solemn sea of relatives in black, the incense, why Grandpa and Grandma were sleeping even though they had come back from their trip with Daddy and everyone had come to see them. "Mommy, what's happening?" Why are Grandpa and Grandma sleeping? Even back then, all she had were questions. Later, even though she finally understood, she still didn't have any answers. Daddy, how come you walk like that? What happened to your leg? And she still didn't really know anything. It had taken years for her to understand what had happened to her grandparents, and what had crippled her father. It had taken even longer for her to understand why her father was only crippled and not gone like her grandparents. A ninja had saved her father's life. They hadn't been able to save her grandparents, or her father's leg, but her father was alive because of a Konoha ninja. That was when she had decided to become a ninja. She would save people like the ninja that had saved her father, only she would do it better. She wouldn't only partially succeed. With that determination, she had begged her parents to enroll her in the academy. She hadn't really understood what it would mean, hadn't known what she would have to sacrifice or the risks she would have to take. When she had made her choice, she had been a little girl with a hazy dream. But just because she hadn't understood, and maybe still didn't understand, that didn't mean that the determination that she had felt then was wrong. It didn't mean that her choice was wrong. Her dream. She had wanted to be strong, but not just for the sake of having strength. It was not so that she could hold her head up high. She had not needed to match anyone, not back then, and she had no concern as to whose back she was looking at. It had nothing to do with pride. It had nothing to do with her tears or her shame. Bullies and schoolyard mockery had not driven her to change her life. It wasn't for Ino. It wasn't for Sasuke. No, that wasn't it at all. From the very beginning, where she was going and what she wanted to do, the reason why she had stepped onto the bloody road of the ninja, it had all been to protect her precious people. That's right. She remembered now. That was why she had entered the academy. That was why she studied, even though it wasn't fun or rewarding. That was why she trained, even though it was hard, even though it hurt. That was why she would risk her life, even though she was scared. That was why she would fight, even though she could die, even if she became a murderer. Even if the girl she had been would look at her and see a monster, it would be all right as long as she was able to live up to that one dream. She would fight. Even though she was outnumbered, even though she was afraid, even though she had no chance of winning. Haruno Sakura would fight, because she had something to protect. That was the kind of person she wanted to become. That was why she was a ninja. In the end, it was so simple she wanted to laugh. Sakura quieted her fear and took a calming breath, steadying her breathing. If Haruno Sakura wanted to be a ninja to protect the things that were precious to her, then she had to fight. And she had to win. No matter what, defeat was not an option, not while she had something to protect. Never again would she abandon a teammate. She would never feel worse than trash again, because she wouldn't give herself a reason to. Sakura stared into the cold eyes of her enemy and, for the first time, felt no doubt. She was still scared, but fear was just something she had to conquer. I can win, she thought. The realization was part epiphany, part faith. It would be tough. He was probably a better ninja than her, and he had teammates by his side. Still, the chance for victory existed. It was so distant that she couldn't see the path that would lead her there, but it was there. All she had to do was take a step forward and the way would become a little clearer. If she kept moving forward, kept looking for a way to win, the path to victory would open up. A small, genuine smile crossed her face. An instant later, she launched a barrage of shuriken towards her foe. He snorted contemptuously. Air roared. Sakura's shuriken shot back towards her, moving even faster than when she had thrown them. Those tubes, they can somehow blast air. Which meant that fighting at range was not a good idea, but if she closed the distance, taijutsu was her weakest point among the three principal ninja arts. Still, she leapt backwards, creating more distance. She needed some more time to come up with a plan, and venturing closer to her opponent's teammates wasn't a good idea. His teammates. Where was the kunoichi? A dreadful premonition crossed her mind, but it was too late. A firm hand yanked her hair, driving her down to the ground. It was almost textbook perfect in its execution. It should have worked, would have worked, except Sakura was used to opponents putting her in submission holds from behind. Training with Naruto and battling his numerous Kage Bunshin had seen to that, if nothing else. Instinctively, Sakura sent a burst of chakra through her feet and drove herself upwards and backwards desperately. If she couldn't break the hold on her hair, she would be trapped. Her vision exploded into white as her skull smashed into the sound kunoichi's chin with a loud crack. Sakura leapt away, blind and heedless of direction, as soon as she felt the grip on her hair loosen. Her head was ringing like a bell, but she knew she couldn't stop moving. It was 3 against 1, and if she got trapped it would all be over. Her experiences from training with Naruto had taught her how to fight against multiple opponents. Fighting his Kage Bunshin was a lot easier than fighting the three Otonin, but the same principles applied. She had to stay mobile in order to evade being trapped or outflanked, and she had to attack before the sound genin could recover their balance. If she lost the initiative, her chances of coming out alive went down drastically. There was only one choice that made sense. The sound kunoichi, kin, was partially stunned by the hard blow to her chin, and she was the closest enemy to Sakura. That meant that not only was she the closest threat, but also the closest opportunity. Sakura reversed course instantly, thrusting chakra out her feet as though she had plenty to burn, blowing soil away from her feet as she launched herself back towards her target. In actuality, she was nearing her limit, having had no chance to really rest since she had entered the forest. But in light of the situation, conservation wasn't a consideration. Victory was all that mattered, and victory required speed. She hammered into the other kunoichi with her shoulder, sacrificing grace and technique in order to keep from having to slow down and potentially give Kin a chance to recover any more than she had. Kin wheezed as the air was driven from her lungs by the impact, but her hands nonetheless managed to grasp Sakura and pull the Konoha genin with her as she was knocked to the ground. "Dosa! Saka!" Kin screamed hoarsely, struggling to restrain Sakura. "Finish her!" Sakura twisted violently, frantically. Her back was exposed to the world and she couldn't move. All Kin's two teammates needed to do was throw a kunai and she would have almost no chance of evading it. She needed to escape the sound kunoichi's grasp quickly, or she was dead. Sakura bit into Kin's shoulder viciously, clamping her teeth down as hard as she could, and jerked her head like a dog tearing flesh from bone. The dark-haired kunoichi screamed in agony and for an instant the grip pinning Sakura's arms loosened. Time was running out. The one called Zaku was nearly upon her. A few more seconds, and she would be dead. The painful grip on her hair and the legs that trapped hers kept her from rising, but her right hand was free. Sakura drew a kunai from her equipment pouch rapidly. She had to move. If she didn't move, she would die. If she died, Sasuke would die too. The thought of killing made her sick inside. It had ever since Taki no Kuni, though the feeling had started back in Wave Country when she had gotten her first real sight of violent death firsthand. But the thought of failing again, of abandoning yet another comrade because she didn't see what had to be done or couldn't stomach doing it, made her even sicker. She had become a shinobi because she wanted to protect the people that were precious to her. She had decided to fight and win, no matter what. There was no time for thought or second guessing. Deep inside, Haruno Sakura's answer to the question had already been decided. Sakura buried the kunai in Kin's neck, opposite of where she was biting the girl. Blood, warm and thick, gushed over her right hand. More hit Sakura's cheek as Kin let loose a bloody, bubbling gasp. The sensation barely registered as Sakura violently wrenched herself from the dying kunoichi's grip, her hands flying through seals. Zaku's attack came less than a second later, delivering sure death to the log that was Sakura's replacement. "Don't think," Sakura told herself fiercely as she swiftly descended towards Zaku, a fistful of shuriken in each hand. She couldn't afford to think about the blood, or the wet sound of a dying enemy's gasp. Keep moving. That was all she could allow herself to think about. Keep moving, keep evading death and pursuing victory. She launched the shuriken, then starting forming seals again. Zaku had spotted her, and the shuriken, and released another blast of wind even stronger than before, buffeting Sakura and sending her weapons spinning straight back towards her. But that was okay, she had expected it. Again, only a log was left to meet the attack. Sakura charged towards Zaku's back, the last kunai in her equipment pouch gripped tightly in her fist. She would fight. And she would win, even if it meant killing, even if it meant her life. To protect the things she had decided to protect, that was what she had to do. When she had decided to become a ninja, that was the choice she made. Without hesitation, without mercy, Sakura closed the distance between her and Zaku and plunged the kunai into his side. It was not an instantly lethal blow, but it was enough to give her time to finish him. Or it would have been, if she hadn't just stabbed a log. "You're not the only one who can do Kawarimi no Jutsu, you know," a voice said from behind her. Sakura started to move, to throw herself forward, but it was too late. Die. What was she seeing? That's Sakura? Yamanaka Ino could barely comprehend what was happening. Sasuke was unconscious. Naruto was nowhere in sight. Sakura was fighting by herself against the genin from the sound. It was not what she had been expecting to see when she had dragged her team to observe Team 7 after Chuchi had spotted Sakura facing off against the Otonin. How could she have grown so much? Where was the shy, cute little girl who had cried so easily? Sakura had fought a desperate, furious battle against an obviously superior enemy. It would have been utterly impossible for the Sakura Ino knew. But then, it had quickly become obvious that Sakura was gone. In her place was a skilled kunoichi that had seemingly gone head-to-head with two opponents that she shouldn't have been able to match and come out even, if not ahead. Sakura's swift reaction to the duo's trap spoke of quick reflexes and combat experience. Ino wasn't sure she could have gotten out of the sound kunoichi's hold in time, much less turn around and bring her down instead. Then Sakura was pinned. Shikamaru hissed, alarmed. Ino! At this rate. He didn't need to say it. Ino could see it herself. Sakura was going to die if she couldn't get out of that hold before the brown-clad genin with the cheek guards got to her. But weren't they rivals? Wasn't this the Chunin exams? Should she interfere, even though she would probably get her team killed? They would be in over their heads. Ino could admit at least that much to herself. Her team was probably the weakest in the exam as far as combat went. As long as she was being honest with herself, she could even admit that she would fare no better than Sakura. But how could she leave that girl alone? There was no way she could do that. Their rivalry had yet to reach a conclusion. She couldn't allow Sakura to die until she acknowledged Ino's victory. Besides, it would be 4 against 3. Those odds weren't too bad, right? No. 4 against 2. Sakura. What was she looking at, again? Did she just see? Ino watched, stunned, as Sakura wrenched herself free from the dying kunoichi's grip. She couldn't move as Sasuke stabbed her, only to find that Sakura had evaded him once more. You've grown up so much, Sakura. The realization was bittersweet. The little flower she had once seen had blossomed beautifully after all. How much have you changed? Suddenly, it was as if the gulf between them had widened into a vast, yawning chasm. More than Sasuke lied between them now. Sakura had changed so much in the time they had been apart. How much of their friendship was left? How much of the little girl Ino had first met was left? Then the Otonin was behind Sakura, and Sakura was moving desperately, too slow, and for some reason Ino was moving too. Then she wasn't. I can't move. Why? I need to move. I have to save. Ino. Shikamaru's tense voice suddenly revealed everything. Shikamaru! She hissed desperately. Let go! I have to. Look, he said urgently. You can't go out there right now. It's too dangerous. Ino looked, gasping as she saw what was making Shikamaru so nervous. It was Sasuke. It was Sasuke, but it felt like filthy, oily sludge had been poured over her. It felt like evil. Sakura didn't know how else to explain the feeling that welled within her as she looked at her savior. Sasuke-kun had saved her, had batted away Zaku almost contemptuously with a single blow, but for some reason she wasn't happy about it. How could she be? The dark, inky marks that had spread across his skin gave him an almost sinister appearance, and the crimson Sharingan didn't help. But the dark chakra that was leaking from Sasuke filled her with foreboding. She could feel the power, its potency lapped against her skin like waves on the seashore. Yet she could only describe it as disgusting, unclean. It felt monstrous. Sakura. She nearly jumped as Sasuke spoke. Even his voice sounded menacing. Who did that to you? Sasuke-kun? She hated how weak her voice sounded. What happened to you? What did that Kusanin do to you? We did. Zaku grinned in anticipation despite the blood slowly winding down his face. It was clear that he was relishing the moment. What happened? Sakura begged silently. Why does your chakra feel so wrong? Don't worry, Sasuke said, his voice still cold and sharp. I feel power overflowing from within me. I feel great. What? How could he feel great? Couldn't he feel the taint he was giving off? He gave it to me. Sasuke continued, but this time he seemed to be talking to himself. Huh! Sakura felt lost. I finally understand it. I am an avenger. His fists clenched. Even if I must eat the devil's fruit, I am on a path where I must gain power. What are you saying? She didn't understand. Only, his words filled her with dread. Sasuke-kun. What could she say? Sasuke looked at the two remaining sound ninja. The putrid chakra flared, amplified. Murderous intent filled the air. No. Sasuke growled. It was you guys, right? Ugh. Wow. That hurts. Consciousness, Naruto had lately discovered, was overrated. When you weren't conscious, things didn't hurt nearly as much, or at least you weren't aware of it, which was almost just as good. The first time he had fallen unconscious during the exam had hardly been pleasant, but it had actually been rather pain-free in hindsight. Getting blasted by an enormous gust of chakra-enhanced wind and nearly getting eaten by a giant snake were actually not too bad, all things considered. Considering what happened after that, the pain he was feeling was nothing compared to the pain he had felt before he had fallen unconscious the second time. Compared to the pain then, when he had been cut and burned and broken, when his skin was blackened and cracked and weeping. He closed his eyes tightly, his breathing growing erratic. Don't think about it, he told himself desperately. Don't think about it, don't remember, just shove it aside and move forward. It was the only thing he could do, because remembering those sensations would break him if he thought about it too much. He winced as he shifted slightly, his still too sensitive skin protesting as his back rubbed against the hard ground beneath him. Naruto sat up cautiously, half expecting his body to be too ravaged to comply. He was pleasantly surprised to find that he was actually in pretty good shape. No burns, cuts, or broken bones as far as he could tell. Sure, his skin still felt weird, and he ached all over, but he could deal with that. So, his body was fine. He even had his clothes again, which was great. That left the little matter of where he was and how he had gotten there. You're up, a friendly, familiar voice observed. Naruto gaped in surprise for a moment. Kabuto-san! He exclaimed, shooting to his feet and immediately wincing at his body's sharp protest at the moment. Apparently his body was not totally fine just yet. The gray-haired genin frowned sternly. Don't strain yourself, Naruto-kun. You were pretty beat up when I found you. Now he knew how he had gotten to his present location. Things were looking up. You found me? Kabuto nodded solemnly. I was scouting out some of the other teams. You were collapsed on the ground when I found you. He paused before continuing almost hesitantly. You were in pretty rough shape. Naruto stared at the older genin uncertainly. Did he suspect something? How could Naruto explain away the side effects of the Kyuubi's presence? Even so, if Kabuto hadn't come along, he didn't even want to think about what could have happened to him, alone and unconscious in the forest of death. Thanks, he said finally, roughly, trying to conceal the emotion clouding his voice. It was nothing. Kabuto shrugged modestly. Konohanin have to look out for each other, right? Naruto grinned. Right. He agreed. If you don't mind, could you tell me what happened to you? Kabuto asked curiously. It doesn't look like you just got into a fight. Naruto's grin faltered as he struggled to contain the tide of dark emotions that surged up. I got separated from my team, he said finally. The Kirinin caught me. They didn't like me that much, he explained lightly. I could see that, Kabuto said dryly. You didn't like them very much either, right? Naruto frowned at him. What? When I went to get your clothes, I saw some of the... He trailed off, searching for the right word. Remains. It was hard for Naruto not to flinch at that. He had lost control again. As a result, his enemy's blood painted the battlefield, but still. He still remembered Kakashi-sensei's words very well. One day, he could lose control and it would be his comrades who paid. His imagination could paint a stark picture of what he would see when he emerged from the darkness if that ever happened. The blood painting the battlefield wouldn't only be from his enemies. Naruto could imagine it all too well. He knew exactly what it would look like now. You don't have to tell me, Kabuto said, interrupting the stretching silence. But we should probably get moving now that you're up. I think we've been in one place for too long. Yeah? Naruto blinked and nodded uncertainly, shoving the image away. He paused. We? Naruto asked. I'll help you find your team. Kabuto smiled. As a medic, I can't leave an injured comrade alone. You're a medic? Naruto asked, startled. Kabuto frowned. Is that strange? No. Naruto laughed nervously, wondering if he had offended the nice older genin. He didn't even know why he was surprised. Male medical ninja weren't that rare. Naruto coughed before exclaiming, Let's get going! He looked around for a moment, trying to get his bearings. The ancient, twisted trees of the forest of death loomed as high as ever, their thick green canopies little more than gloomy shadows to Naruto's vision. Broken light bloomed in mottled patterns on the cool forest floor. Where's the sun? The forest was surprisingly tricky to navigate. It took several moments for Naruto to figure out the rough direction to where his team had last been. Finally, nodding to himself, Naruto began marching forward determinedly. Naruto-kun? This way, Kabuto-san, Naruto said tersely, not bothering to look back. He didn't want the other genin to see his rising uncertainty. Oh man, I hope this is the right way. The more he thought about it, the less certain he became. Behind him, Kabuto adjusted his glasses and sighed wearily before following Naruto. They moved at a modest pace, partly due to Naruto's lingering soreness and exhaustion, and partly because he wasn't sure if he was going in the right direction. Getting blown away by a massive futon jutsu, and then getting kidnapped had done wonders to make him lose his bearings. Finally, Kabuto could take it no longer. Stopping, he raised his voice. Naruto-kun. Naruto turned. Yeah? Do you know where you are going? Kabuto bluntly asked. Naruto stalled. He scratched his head sheepishly. Not really, he admitted. Kabuto sighed again, counted to 5 slowly, and pulled out a map. Here's where we are. He pointed, showing Naruto the map. Now, where were you separated from the rest of your team? Squinting thoughtfully, Naruto studied the map. Mentally, he began retracting Team 7's steps from their access gate to where they had been separated. Here. Naruto stabbed his finger down. You're sure? Something in Kabuto's tone offended Naruto. Of course, he said indignantly. All right. Kabuto nodded amiably, folding up his map and slipping it back into his equipment pouch. Shall we go? He asked, already starting to walk again. Naruto nodded and silently followed Kabuto. He didn't like giving up the lead, even if Kabuto was older and more experienced than him, but he had already embarrassed himself once. Besides, finding his team was more important than who led the way. Their pace slowly but steadily crept up as strength began returning to Naruto's limbs. By the time they stumbled across the scar in the earth left behind by the blasting winds that had thrown Naruto, he was comfortable enough to leave the ground behind and take to the trees. Comfortable or not, he would have forced himself to do it once he saw the devastating aftermath of the technique he had been hit with. Anxiety flooded through him as he stared at the rent earth. The ground had been ripped apart where the chakra-enhanced wind had passed, and the proud trees that had stood in its way now littered the area, broken and smashed, some little more than matchsticks. The guy who did this was strong, he thought grimly. Really strong. He could only pray that Sakura and Sasuke were safe. If they weren't, he shook his head, trying to dislodge the grisly images his imagination presented. Naruto didn't know what he would do. He wasn't sure he could take it if he was too late. Tracking Sakura and Sasuke was frustrating to an already impatient Naruto, but it wasn't long before he was thanking heaven for his luck in encountering Kabuto. The older Genin's experience proved invaluable in picking up the trail and staying on it. Naruto didn't think he was too shabby at tracking, for a Genin, at least, but it quickly became clear that Kabuto was way better than him. It was a cry of pain first told them they were close. Immediately, the pair of Konoha Genin stopped and exchanged glances. Kabuto gestured quickly. Naruto nodded, and the pair moved cautiously forward, searching for a good vantage point to scout out the situation. The moment Naruto cautiously peered out around the trunk of the tree he had selected, he knew he had found his team. Barely a second after that registered, he began making his way closer to them. Only the fact that he had seen unfamiliar figures with them kept him from charging into the clearing. His entrance on the Great Naruto Bridge, he still savored the name every time he thought of it. In order to save Sasuke had been an embarrassment, but it had also been a good lesson. He needed to make sure he understood the situation before making any overt moves. Naruto crouched behind a dense patch of foliage and cautiously looked through the gaps between leaves. It was immediately clear that he had found his team, and a sense of relief so potent it was almost dizzying washed over him. The gnawing anxiety he had been trying to ignore ever since he had begun to suspect the danger they might be in began to melt away. They were alive. Sakura-chan was scuffed and bruised, and her hands were red with blood, but she was alive and whole. Sasuke was evidently fine, given the way he was facing off against the two sound genin. But there was no time to celebrate. His team was fighting and he had to help them, though as far as Naruto could tell Sasuke seemed to be controlling the pace of the battle easily enough. Too easily. He squinted. What the hell is going on with Sasuke? Naruto wondered. Tendrils of unease worked through him, regaining the territory that they had lost to his earlier relief. Whatever was going on, it wasn't normal. Sasuke was fast, but he wasn't that fast. He was a good ninja, even if admitting it made Naruto feel dirty, but he wasn't that good. And that chakra. Whatever Sasuke was or wasn't, he definitely didn't have chakra like that. Naruto could feel it seething through the air even as far away as he was. Being able to feel raw chakra wasn't normal, and its taint gave Naruto a bad taste in his mouth. Naruto wasn't sure what he should feel as he watched Sasuke beat the two foreign genin around almost contemptuously, like a malicious cat playing with fat mice that couldn't quite manage to get away fast enough. His relief at seeing his teammates alive and relatively unharmed had already faded. He felt faintly disgusted at the way Sasuke was playing with his enemies, but he couldn't help but feel concerned. That weird chakra, those marks, what the hell happened while I was gone? Sasuke's soft laughter startled Naruto. In the instant his attention had wavered, Sasuke had somehow gotten behind one of the sound nin and pinned him to the ground. He had his foot planted between the Otonin's shoulder blades while he held his enemy's arms high in the air behind him, bent at a painful angle. It was not a hold Naruto had ever seen before, but it seemed to work fine for Sasuke. Then Sasuke smiled widely. Naruto had never seen his teammate look so happy. A moment later, Sasuke's grip shifted and his foot slammed the Otonin brutally into the ground. A sickening crack rang through the air as the foreign genin's arms snapped at the elbows, forearms bending back over his joints at an unnatural angle. The Otonin howled in agony as he collapsed limply to the ground. Sasuke kept smiling delightedly. Fury filled Naruto, so hot and thick he felt like he could choke on it. They were ninja. Naruto understood that. Everyone in the forest was an assassin, a spy, a soldier of their hidden village and their country. They fought, they hurt people, and they killed. Sometimes they did dirty things, but they did it because it was their job. They were not supposed to enjoy hurting people. They were not supposed to smile and torture their foes just because they could, just because they wanted to. Torturing someone for no reason, causing pain to others just because they were stronger, was not right. Torturing someone was. Memories rose, shrieking, scrabbling at the barriers he had erected to keep them shut in the dark. It was absolutely wrong. That was not the way of the ninja that Naruto had set out to follow. It was not the kind of thing he could sit back and watch happen in front of him. It was unforgivable. Sasuke turned to the other Otonin, still smiling, his mouth forming words that Naruto could no longer hear over the loud roaring in his ears. He's still smiling. Rage overwhelmed common sense. Distantly, he was aware of his body moving. Sasuke took a half step forward towards the last Oto genin before stopping, his head turning slightly. Naruto! Naruto barely registered Sakura's voice. The world around him blurred, dissolved away. All he could see was that smirk. He had to get rid of it. Naruto stepped into range, chakra kicking up small plumes of dust where his feet hit the ground, and lashed out with a fist aimed unerringly towards Sasuke's pale, unusually marked face. Almost contemptuously, Sasuke turned the attack away with one hand while the other moved to strike, to capitalize on the opening. There was no time for Naruto to think, to comprehend Sasuke's attack or figure out how to counter it. His guard was down, and his enemy was faster than he had ever been. Sasuke's counterpunch was barely a blur to Naruto's eyes. It was an attack that was impossible for him to avoid. They were too close. Sasuke was too fast. Naruto reeled backwards, his head ringing from Sasuke's blow. He glared at his smug-looking teammate. How could he possibly get through to Sasuke if he couldn't even manage to avoid one counter? But one hit had told Naruto enough. Sasuke's fist was too fast for him as he was now. He could not dodge it or block it. It would hit him no matter how he tried to defend himself. He did not have skill. He was completely talentless. He did not have any inborn talents. From the very beginning, Uchiha Sasuke and Uzumaki Naruto had been on different levels. Objectively, there was no way he could win. Naruto had none of Sasuke's advantages. But that didn't mean he lacked anything to call his own. The moment in which the enemy attacks is often the time he is most vulnerable, Naruto-sama. Learn to feel the moment, to grasp the instant your opponent commits. Haku's soft voice whispered from his memories. When you can understand that, you will be able to cut through your enemy's attacks. He had someone to look after now, someone who looked after him in return, someone to come home to. He had promised her that he would do his best. He couldn't let her down. There was no way he could let the things she had taught him lose against Sasuke. And he had a team now, his friends, his comrades, his first real bonds. Because of that, he had to stop Sasuke. He couldn't let one of his precious people soil their hands with other people's pain. He couldn't sit back and watch Sasuke smile while he hurt people. Part of being friends, part of being family, was scolding them when they did bad things. A shout rose in Naruto's chest. He launched himself back at Sasuke. His mind couldn't think fast enough, his eyes couldn't see Sasuke's punch, but that was fine. Even without them, his body understood. It knew instantly how to respond. He had faced faster attacks hundreds of times already. He wasn't a prodigy, but he had been hit by attacks just like Sasuke's, or even faster, hundreds of times in the past month alone. In the end, what did it matter if he couldn't see Sasuke's counter? The answer was simple. It didn't matter. Sasuke became a blur. Without thought, without understanding, Naruto's arm moved. Haku walked along the street that would take her back to Ichiraku's, grocery sacks swinging lightly in her hands. Tucci had started sending her out for supplies once he had realized that despite her being the most delicate looking, she happened to be the strongest out of all three of them. It was not a task she relished, despite it letting her get away from the heat of the stoves and into the open air for a time. Being around so many people was difficult and mentally tiring. She still struggled with old fears, and the lack of even the most superficial disguise only made her disquiet more intense. Worse was the anxiety over Naruto that bubbled up inexorably whenever she was alone with her thoughts. Her imagination never failed to conjure her nightmares, images that reflected the terror that lurked in the dark corners of her mind, whenever her mind turned to him. Not knowing was the hardest thing of all. It had been 3 days since she had last seen him. In a few more days, the first 2 exams would be over and he would come home again. All she could do was wait. So she waited, working with as much enthusiasm as she was able to muster and training until she could barely walk. It had been an exhausting couple of days. But no matter how hard she tried, she was not able to drown her worries with work. She could not silence her dreams with exhaustion. How was he? Was he safe? Healthy? Did he need her help? What if? The uncertainty would drive her insane if she let it. So would the knowledge that she could not be there to help him. She had stayed silent and stood aside as he entered the Chunin exams, believing in the boy who had saved her, supporting his dreams the only way she could. Haku still thought she had done the right thing. But every day that passed made it harder and harder for her to believe that. Every day, her nightmares grew darker, stronger. If anything happened to him because she was not there for him, it would be just like that day. If something like that happened again, she would. No. She would. No, she thought again as forcefully as she could, as if by thinking about it strongly enough she could brand her denial into her brain and make it permanent. That was behind her. Naruto was not the same as Zabuza. Today was not the same as that day. Things were different now. She had a home. She had a friend. She could live without being hunted. Haku knew she had to keep moving forward. She could not allow the past or her fears to control her. A blade with such cracks was certain to shatter, to fail against the enemy, and she would not allow herself to be a flawed weapon ever again. It was hard though. Her fears did not care about her determination. Reason and will meant nothing to the darkness in her heart. All she could do was wrestle her terror back down whenever it surged up. But that was all right, as long as she continued to win. Even if the margin for victory was narrow, it was enough as long as she was able to maintain the careful thread of her sanity and reason. If she hurt someone because of her own weakness again, she would never be able to forgive herself. The cut on Ayam's face had been small, and it had already faded, but Haku had not forgotten. She was not superhuman, to be able to make a resolution and carry it through immediately, and without fault. She was not strong enough to overcome her flaws so easily. Sometimes determination and will were not enough. Change took time. Haku understood that. It was frustrating, but she understood. But she wanted to change so badly. She had failed so many times because of her weakness. But it would not happen in a day, no matter how much she wished for it. All she could do was remember her resolutions and try to remain true to them every day, for as long as it took. Sometimes she would succeed. Sometimes she would fail. But she had to keep moving forward. Haku closed her eyes, struggling to banish her worries and willing herself to think about something else. The impact stunned her, sending her stumbling back several paces. One of the grocery bags slipped out of her hand and landed on the ground with a thud, sending several onions rolling across the ground. Haku stared, unsettled, at the tall man she had bumped into. He was tall, brown-haired and brown-eyed, and heavily muscled. His sun-weathered skin and his clothes gave the impression of a construction worker. That she had been so distracted by her internal turmoil that she had bumped into someone before she realized he was there. For a kunoichi used to being pursued by bounty hunters and Kiri's hunter-nin, it was immensely troubling. She had to get her act together. She was getting too soft, too weak. "Sorry," the man blurted apologetically. He scratched his neck, looking embarrassed. "I wasn't looking where I was going and—" "No," Haku said softly, though it took a moment for her to find her voice. "It was my fault." Inwardly, she was berating herself bitterly. If he had been an enemy, he could have killed her easily. Once again, her weakness had led to failure. No, he protested. "It was really my—" He trailed off, looking at the bag of groceries at his feet. "Oh," he said, bending down to gather the items that had slipped out and picking up the bag. Haku watched warily as he approached, holding the bag in front of him. "Here," he offered, smiling. "Thank you." She accepted the bag cautiously. It was nothing. He beamed. Really, I'm sorry about bumping into you. He apologized once more before getting on his way. Haku watched him go silently, still shaken by her incredible lapse in awareness. It was unacceptable. Somehow, she had to figure out how to get a handle on herself. If she could not control herself. A slight stinging sensation on her hand broke her train of thought. Haku raised her right hand, dusty grocery bag rising in tow, and frowned at the small drop of red blood welling from the pale skin on top of it. A mosquito must have bitten her, judging from the fact that she had not felt a thing until after the fact. Nonetheless, suspicions began to form. She turned her head slightly, looking behind her. What if? No. Now was not the time to let paranoia take control of her. Haku shoved aside her troubled thoughts and continued her journey back to the ramen stand, her pace brisk in order to make up for the delay. He stepped into his hotel room, locked the door behind him, and then swept through the room, searching for anything that was out of place. Once he was done, Takai could have finally allowed himself to relax. Carefully, he pulled out a small glass bottle from its hiding place inside his shirt. Kuda held it up, studying the slender needle and the small drop of blood that stained it. What are you going to tell me? He asked the bottle softly. His hand trembled slightly. It was possible that he was finally holding on to the thing he had sought for nearly 20 years. He would take it back to Kirigakure himself as soon as night fell. There, he could have it analyzed and compared against the data he had meticulously collected over the years. If it really was what he thought it might be, then he could finally achieve his dream. The reason why he had become a shinobi and driven himself all the way to Jonin, it was at long last in his grasp. Father, mother, just a little longer. A little longer, and he would have his vengeance. Kirigakure's purge of the bloodlines had been bloody and brutal. Civil war had gripped the whole country. It was not just ninja against ninja. Fear, hatred, and suspicion had filled the nation. To be suspected of carrying tainted blood meant death. There had been so much death. Ninja clans, especially those bearing bloodline limits, were not rabbits to be hunted. They fought back, whenever and however they could. Innocents in that war were few and far between, but his parents had been among them. Kuda was sure of that. It hadn't mattered. They had been killed by ninja. He was sure of that too. There was no way they would have had frostbitten limbs in spring otherwise. His life had been ruined. Kuda's uncle took him in, and while he hadn't hated the man, he was not Kuda's father. His wife was not Kuda's mother. Their house wasn't his home. But he had lived, or gone through the motions of living, without any thought of seeing justice done. Shinobi had killed his parents. What could a peasant boy possibly do? A single conversation had changed his life. He had been nearing 8, and had lived for more than a year without his parents. His grief had become a hollow thing, and by that time he barely remembered what their faces looked like anymore, but he still hadn't found anything else to replace it with. 2 soldiers, bodyguards of the local lord, had been complaining to each other about a nukenin that had been assassinating nobles. What does he think we are? How are we going to protect him if some ninja comes after his head? Hell if I know. All I know is it's not what I signed up for. Everyone knows it takes a ninja to deal with another ninja. Cheap bastard needs to. Kuda had forgotten most of their conversation, but he still remembered the words that had given him purpose. It took a ninja to deal with another ninja. If he was a ninja, he could hunt down his parents' murderers. It was a simple idea, but in reality it nearly broke him. His first few years in the Bloody Mist had been brutal, and he had come so close to forgetting his parents altogether more times than he could count. But in the end he survived, graduated from the academy, and became a genin. His next few years remained a desperate struggle for survival as he clawed his way up to Chunin, and there was little time to even think about his parents when he was desperately training and fighting for his life. Things were a bit different in the mist now. His genin certainly hadn't faced the things he had. It wasn't until he had become a Chunin that he could return to pursuing his original goal. By then, he knew that if the shinobi who had killed his parents had used ice, then they had to have a bloodline limit. That kind of chakra wasn't possible any other way. With that knowledge in mind, he had begun investigating the purge and all of the bloodlines Kiri kept records of. Eventually, he had found one. There had been a clan capable of wetting wind and water to create ice. Supposedly, they had been wiped out. But Kuda had not struggled to become a ninja of Kirigakure for so little. If they were extinct, he had to make sure. Making sure had taken him many years. He continued on, searching, training, and taking missions. Eventually, he became a Jounin and the information he had access to increased exponentially. But even with his new rank, things didn't change. Many times, despair had almost overtaken him. If they really had been wiped out, it would all have been for nothing. It was a thought that had kept him awake for many nights over the years. Then, finally, the situation changed. Zabuza, one of the infamous 7 swordsmen of the mist, had tried to overthrow the Mizukage. He had failed, but he had also escaped with his life. A few years later, one of the hunternin that went after them had been found dead. It was unusual because the way he had been killed didn't resemble Zabuza's methods, or those of any of his known associates. There had been faint signs of frostbite on the body. Kuta had followed Zabuza's trail for years, growing more and more certain that he had finally found a concrete lead. Zabuza died, but the trail didn't grow cold. The people of the wave had been buzzing about the circumstances behind his end for months. Discreet questioning had revealed a wealth of information. No, the trail hadn't grown cold at all. It was hotter than ever, and it led straight to Konoha. The Mizukage's agenda didn't matter to Kuta beyond being a convenient excuse to legitimately enter Konohagakure. He was a loyal ninja, but only to a point. Now his own agenda took precedence over whatever game the Mizukage was playing. That was why he had sent his team specifically after Uzumaki Naruto, heedless of whatever issues that might arise. That was why he had dared to go out and collect the sample he held in his hands, too impatient to wait even a few more days for his team's report to confirm his hunch before making a move. That was why he would leave Konoha tonight, even though the Konohanin would probably mark his absence with suspicion, even though he would be leaving his genin behind. The Mizukage didn't matter. His team didn't matter. Kirigakure, Konoha, either of them mattered. The only thing that he cared about was the truth hidden in the blood sample he carried. If the results matched the records, he would finally have found the last legacy of those that had murdered his parents and stolen the peaceful life he should have had. Kuta could at long last have his revenge on that clan of monsters and murderers. He would put an end to their accursed legacy. He growled hatefully. To him, the name sounded more like a curse than a surname as it crossed his mind unbidden. Shirayuki.